Ray slammed onto broken stone, blood flooding his white robe as he gasped for air. Agony throbbed from the gash in his chest as he slammed his hand over it. He had to heal fast, or his strength would vanish for good. Yggdrasil's labyrinth loomed as an Sss-Rank dungeon, one everyone across the world feared. Those 7 dungeons stayed mostly untouched, hiding ancient treasures in the dark, and swallowing anyone brave enough to find out what dangers lurked inside. A month ago, his A-Rank crew cleared another dungeon, punched their ticket to Yggdrasil, and swaggered straight into a nightmare-level threat. A black mage crashed down through the chaos of roaring explosions, clutching the bloodline of a long-dead witch. Sword scientists surged forward, blasting twin blades with lightning and wind, and her speed and pinpoint precision let her crush their enemies before they could even hesitate. Behind them, the greatsword warrior slammed through enemies with raw power, shrugging off blows just long enough to answer back with crushing strikes. While at the center, Loki, the party's leader, called the shots, armed with lethal combat skill, magic, and command. Meanwhile, Reddy, their white mage, kept his eyes locked on the battlefield as urgent orders told him to heal the injured scientist right in the middle of the fight. Ruby lunged to heal the battered scientist, but his magic sputtered out, then sweat poured down his face as he realized his power just wasn't enough. Weakness crushed him and he crumpled against her, more annoyance than comfort. Meanwhile, the battlefield didn't stop as he clawed to stay conscious. Loki strolled up with chilling calm and handed him a tiny vial, and for a split second you could see worry flicker across his face as Rai lay spent on the ground. The medicine snapped his energy back, wiping out the worst of his exhaustion, but guilt crushed Ray anyway, because he'd forced his leader to burn a precious item. Later, the whole party huddled under that massive tree, and as Ray stayed quiet, cold disappointment spread across their faces like bad news. Ray leaned hard into a tree, catching his breath while the others kept the fight raging around him. He stared at his own limits, realizing that one single healing spell would drain every last drop of magic in an instant. Because he could only heal one person before his body gave out, his very presence forced the whole party to rethink their moves in every brutal battle. Compared to everyone else, his fighting power was downright puny, and he had no extra skills to balance out that crushing weakness. Even with all his flaws, Loki still pulled him into the party, and Radai couldn't shake the feeling it was a wasted invite on someone as unworthy as him. Reddy hauled himself to his feet even though pain still screamed in his bones, told the others he could move, and even while doubt gnawed at his confidence, he grit his teeth and kept following them. Hanging back behind the crew, he couldn't stop feeling grateful, like he'd actually earned his spot, and in his heart, he knew this party was the only place he truly belonged. Frustration erupted among them, because to them, he was nothing but dead weight. Loki snapped everyone back to the mission, get down to the lowest floor and seize Yggdrasil's secret treasure. Confident, too confident, after they wiped out an A-Rank dungeon, the party pushed forward, clueless about the brutal reality waiting for them the deeper they went. On the 125th floor, monstrous things burst out of the dark, and right then, the Sss-Rank dungeon finally showed its real teeth as the party got smashed and overwhelmed in an instant. After they finally backed off, the battered survivors clawed themselves upright, dazed to realize those monsters were packing power on par with, or even worse than, S-Rank threats. It hit them all at once. They'd totally misjudged this floor, and they never saw enemies with that kind of overwhelming power crashing in so fast. But unlike the battles he'd fought before, these monsters were on a whole other level, so strong it made winning feel straight up impossible. Panic slammed into them when they realized this one floor was the only place where beings this powerful even existed. Tension snapped in the silence as the party kept dodging each other's gaze. Rai stayed shut, reading every ounce of frustration in the air and refusing to pour fuel on the fire. Endless monster pressure crushed them, and as exhaustion hit harder, fear and rage churned together in their hearts. Retreat was their only move, but doubts swirled in every step, because nobody wanted to face those terrifying, unstoppable creatures again. They admitted that charging forward like that through the floor was pure carelessness, and the confidence from their earlier wins had totally blinded them. They soon realized escape was a dead end, trapped unless they dared to take a terrifying alternative. Reedy snapped his fingers and remembered that teleport stone they'd scored on the dungeon's lowest A-Rank floor. Using it felt like their one real shot at escaping, and that stone was the key. It's a piece of magic that grabs its owner and yanks them anywhere they want. A small box creaked open, stones clattered out, and each one confirmed the same wild truth. they were packed with multiple pieces of that rare item. Even though the stones were insanely valuable, they all agreed life comes first, so they counted them stone by stone and confirmed there were enough for everyone. Loki still planned to break past the limit before they got away, determined to dive even deeper into danger despite everything already falling apart. Reddy truly believed Loki was a standout leader and swore by his judgment, so he figured every call Loki makes right now is meant to keep the party alive. Out of nowhere, Loki snapped that Reddy was getting kicked out of the party, and that single sentence hit like the heaviest monster blow. Reddy stayed on his knees, stunned, like his brain just couldn't accept what he'd heard. Shock ripped across his face as the others stared, and the reality of exile finally hit him, slow and brutal. Rai couldn't wrap his head around it, so he snapped the question out, begging to know why he was being pushed aside. Without warning, Loki slammed into Rai, sending him crashing to the ground. Pain detonated across his face as shock ripped through him. Loki towered over him and demanded to know if Reddy really needed the reasons spelled out, his words dripping with contempt. Anather's blow landed and Ray crumpled to the ground, fully done. Then the insults of incompetence came flying with zero restraint. The scientist sneered that Rai's battle stare was wrong, twisting his hard-won focus into something shameful. Crushed to the ground, Rai tried to explain he'd only been watching for injuries, but his words fell flat and no one listened. The three loomed over Rai, faces set in stone, cold, unshakable, and ready for war. Silence crashed in as one member stepped forward, staring at him with zero mercy, while Ray fought to keep his breathing from breaking apart. They said his healing was weak and his magic couldn't hold up, so when monsters hit hard, he couldn't back them up, leaving him to carry the weight as a burden. Reddy admitted his magic was draining fast, and he bowed his head as the criticism kept crashing down on him. Desperation surged as he insisted that he'd been gathering intel, studying his enemies, and running camp duties just to cover up his weakness. Reddy lay sprawled on the ground, and as Loki reminded him what their party was expected to do, those words slammed into his chest and crushed the air out of him. They talked about royal trust like it was sacred, and swore their mission was to crush the demon lord, because with dreams that huge, there was zero space for weakness. Loki jabbed a finger at him and declared that this powerless white mage would wreck their future, while Ray just stood there, hearing the truth and unable to deny how small his limits were. Confusion hit him like a storm as he kept asking, "Why me? Why were they ever chosen me?" Memories of his slavery as a kid crash back in, and suddenly Loki's choice feels even more impossible to wrap your head around. Loki, calm as a blade, insisted there had to be a reason for his choice of race, and a sly little smirk slid across his face as Racy hunted for the meaning. Racy blurted out why he'd been picked, praying his loyalty and grind finally meant something. He just wanted proof he truly belonged. Instead, Loki spilled the truth. There'd been no bigger reason behind it at all. He admitted that back then, he would have snapped up anyone cheap with the same kind of skills, and Ravi's shock froze the words right in his throat. With icy indifference, Loki decided Rai was dead weight, and that he didn't need him in his party anymore. Loki swung his voice around and promised he'd swap Rai out for a real white mage, acting like their status gave them the right to pick whoever fit the bill. Rady realized Loki wouldn't even waste a teleport stone on him. He planned to dump him on a floor crawling with monsters, and terror ripped through. He grabbed Rady and panicked at the thought of being left alone down in those dark depths, where desperation crushed every thought. Breathing hard, he begged for his life, swearing he'd change and pleading like his future depended on it, just asking for one more chance to prove he could do better. Loki lunged out of nowhere and shoved a blade into him, ordering, cold as ice, that he heal the wound himself. Shock hit like lightning, then he reeled as the blade's pain ripped through him, fear exploding in his eyes while blood soaked his clothes. Loki snapped at him to heal himself if he wanted to live. No mercy, just icy demand waiting for results. The others erupted in laughter while Ray shook with unbearable pain, his breath turning jagged as hopelessness snapped tighter and tighter around him. With hands trembling, he yanked the weapon free, then screamed as blood splattered the stone and he crumpled forward. Ray frantically hurled healing magic, gripping onto consciousness with both hands as he fought to force his body back to life. Healing light surged over Rai's chest, knitting the wound shut so perfectly it left not a single trace behind. Breathing hard on the dirt, he stayed down as Loki teased that rapid healing was the only real thing he had going for him. Forcing his trembling body up, Rai fought through the crushing exhaustion that always hit right after he used his magic. Determination flared inside him as he fought to his feet, desperate to prove he still mattered. Before he could even catch his breath, Loki slammed into him again, mocking every shaky attempt, and leaving no doubt they were never planning to let him stay standing. Loki snapped that the magic stone was too precious to throw away on Ree, then declared this floor the perfect spot to ditch him. Mocking laughter kept rolling after them as they slid his dagger back in place, smugly insisting he'd last longer if he kept a weapon in his hand. Reddy clutched the blade tight, rage and despair twisting together, while the others triggered their teleportation and disappeared in a blink. All alone, he couldn't stop asking himself why he kept swallowing humiliation just to defend a place that never once wanted him. A monstrous thing closed in on his still body, crushing his defenses in the darkest depths. Ridio teetered on the cliff's edge, coughing out a shaky laugh and demanding to know why he had to choke on endless hardship all by himself. Memories slammed into him, monsters slaughtering his family, him getting dragged into slavery, and then Loki buying him, only for the constant abuse to start and never stop. A brutal slam rocked the ground, yanked his mind out of its thoughts, and snapped him back to the danger right in front of him. His battered body got flung aside and he couldn't fight it. Darkness and debris swallowed him whole. Ray slammed into the water below, and in that brutal splash, his mind started to slip away. He finally saw just how broken and helpless he'd become. As Ray's mind floated in pitch-black nothingness, he felt a familiar voice tugging at him from somewhere past the void. Sound finally crept back into him, and confusion flooded his fading thoughts as the presence pushed him to answer. When his eyes finally snapped open, a strange girl with calm, unshaken eyes stood right in front of him, watching his awakening like she wasn't even afraid. Disoriented, he couldn't wrap his head around how someone like her even survived in a place this dangerous. Even with his doubts, her teasing grin and steady posture screamed one thing: she wasn't just some random face trapped in the labyrinth. The girl spoke in a calm voice and said she could point out where they were, but she shut down the moment they asked why she'd come. Reddy realized they'd landed on the 20th and the absolute lowest floor of Yggdrasil's labyrinth, a spot almost nobody escaped alive. Shock hit his face like a truck, because if escape from the lowest level was supposed to be impossible, how did this even happen? She didn't argue, she told him he could go, because he'd already pulled the one important thing they needed. With a calm, unshakable look, she spilled the truth: he wasn't holding anything ordinary, it was Yggdrasil's secret treasure. The girl snapped the truth: Reedy had already been cursed by Yggdrasil, and she could feel that dark aura clinging to his battered body. Shock slammed onto his face when she pointed straight at his damaged left eye, proving that connection. She told him his magic circuit was now tied directly to Yggdrasil, so the power wouldn't run out ever. With unshakable calm, she told him his life hinged on one choice: how he used that secret treasure. In the dungeon, he stumbled on a mysterious girl who whispered about Yggdrasil's curse and endless magic, then introduced herself as Norn. Confusion swirled through Reddy's mind as she struggled to remember her name, while Norn stayed eerily calm, studying his fading, weakened body. She clocked him as a white mage and pushed him to cast healing magic, even as he clearly hesitated. Fear of exhaustion clawed back into him, but Rady gritted his teeth and pushed through to cast the spell anyway. Radiant energy surged over him, and the healing kicked in with a shocking, unstoppable punch. Rady cast healing magic, and to his shock, no fatigue hit at all. He stared amazed because power was still flowing through him. Energy surged through him, and he could finally feel his magic wasn't empty anymore. Norn told them his magic circuit had latched onto Yggdrasil and yanked his core out, swapping it for its massive power source. So once reconnected the dots, Dawn realized her magic had stopped coming from herself and started flowing straight from Yggdrasil. Shock snapped into clarity when he finally realized unlimited magic was his to unleash. Racy finally admitted his curiosity. He couldn't stop himself from chasing answers about the wild change ripping through his body. Norn dragged him deeper into the dungeon and told him the cruel truth: his condition and the curse he'd been handed were tied to a hidden spring. They screeched to a stop at a massive pool, and she finally confessed that he'd been floating there the whole time after the current swept him away. Norn declared the water was Yggdrasil's precious treasure, none other than the World Tree's tears. Then she finally pointed him to the skyscraping World Tree, so huge it became the dungeon itself. Rika finally figured out this was the dungeon's lowest floor, where Yggdrasil's treasure was buried deep at the very core, and that's when everything hit her. The World Tree's spring water fed an endless supply of magic, its secret stash that never ran out. Reedy swallowed the truth and suddenly everything clicked. He really had snagged that secret treasure, and its power hit like a tidal wave. Norn snapped that she wouldn't explain why she was there, then pointed out exactly which floor they were on inside the labyrinth. Reedy snapped at the silence in her head, then realized she'd actually survived all this time by herself, trapped in that dungeon the whole way through. Norn's strength claim sounded fake to him. He couldn't shake the question of how someone so young could possibly survive in this restricted dungeon with nothing but sheer grit. With pure confidence, Norn flaunted her power and swore she'd wipe out S-rate monsters on the spot. No sweat at all. She swallowed her pride and told Reedy straight up that he already knew what was going on, and that it was only a matter of time before he had to leave. Reedy finally confessed his escape plan. He'd have to take down the S-rate monsters first, and that challenge was way past what he'd ever been able to handle before. Even with unlimited magic in his hands, doubt crushed him, because he couldn't shake the fear that a simple white mage could survive out there. Rurai seethed in silence over his banishment, replaying the faces of his old party as the truth hit him hard. He'd been tossed aside for good. Bitterness crashed down on him the moment he understood. No exit, no home, and nothing waiting outside that dungeon. Dread fogged his mind, and he seriously thought about staying put, because stepping outside felt like stepping into nothing at all. Imagine spending your whole life trapped in the dungeon's depths until that massive cavern finally opens up in front of you. Fists clenched, he realized that if he stayed, he'd lose his chance to save anyone. Half ready, he threw out a joke asking if he could live in the dungeon, while a shaky, forced smile hid the uncertainty crawling under his skin. Norn snapped into shock, and it hit him. He used to dream of leaving, yet he still casually told him, just stay for a while. Rhea wavered once more, then grabbed her courage and asked how anyone could survive in a place like this. Norn broke down Yggdrasil's magic, then fed his body from it, stitching up his wounds, cutting off starvation before it could strike. Reedy stood there in shock. He just discovered he was nearly immortal. But even so, one deadly wound could still cut his life short. Ray balked at Norn's warning, scratching his head at her cryptic hint, because somehow staying there was supposed to rip the dungeon's ugly truths wide open. With razor-sharp honesty, she snapped that he was still weak, and if he didn't gain real strength, he'd end up praying to monsters forever. Ray swallowed her pride and agreed to learn from her, because she finally realized that dungeon was anything but safe. Determination slammed doubt aside as he swore he'd grow strong enough to stand on his own, without dragging anyone else down. 3 years later, on the 180th floor, Riai stood alone, hard-earned and completely remade by relentless training. Reedy clenched the dagger tight as the ground buckled under the crushing weight of a massive serpent. He surged ahead and smashed into its body with pinpoint force, cracking scales and slamming the creature backward. The serpent lashed back, but the rider slipped under its strike and carved a brutal slash across its bare underside. Dust and debris exploded outward as the monster thrashed, and with every brutal hit, its movements ground to a slower, weaker crawl. With one last crushing downward thrust, Right speared straight through its head, ending the whole battle by himself. Ruddy slammed his blade into the serpent's skull, and magic blasted through the dagger as the ground tore open beneath them. The massive body crumpled to the ground in a burst of dust, and he loomed over it, finally feeling it click. He'd won. Norn praised him with a steady smile, like she'd just witnessed him crush the shadow viper that dominated the 180th floor. Ray told him he soaked both his body and his weapon in Yggdrasil's power, then blasted magic straight through the blade. Even when she mocked his old failures, Ray finally admitted those brutal years forged him into who he is. Rissi remembered taking on even the tiniest S-rate monsters, and somehow staying intact only because Yggdrasil's power refused to let his body break. Through non-stop fights, he took hit after hit, then spammed his limitless healing to sharpen his control and get stronger with every wound. That swing of his magic circuit healed what was broken and kept pushing, injuries closing, healing speed rising, and his combat precision getting sharper every moment. Norn admitted she never thought he'd surge forward that fast, and she flat out called him a monster too. Ray bowed his head and thanked her from the bottom of his heart, admitting her guidance forged the warrior he became. From the shadows, a glowing child who looked just like Ray stepped out and declared, "Even after all this growth, I'm still weak." Caught off guard, he snapped around in panic as Norn calmly clocked his rattled face. Ever since he stepped into the dungeon, visions of his younger self kept popping up out of nowhere, right in front of his eyes. Every time death crept closer, that shadow showed up, like it was mirroring how fast his life was slipping away. Norn claims Yggdrasil isn't just holding souls, it's simmering their gathered lives and leftover thoughts in its power, and that's what's twisting those creepy illusions into something real. A faint voice snapped, warning Ricky not to let the power inside him swallow his mind. So he clenched his fist and steadied his thoughts with sheer force. 3 brutal years rolled by in non-stop fighting, and with every vicious blade clash, memories he couldn't hold onto kept crashing back, like time was slipping through his fingers. As they kept trading hits, Norn jabbed at him about missing the outside world, so he shot back with a tight, forced smile. Between each strike, Ray finally admitted how fast time had vanished since the day they first met. Over another fallen rate monster, he finally understood it. Survival had twisted him into someone completely new. In the middle of a sparring match, he suddenly bragged that he'd survived countless near-deaths and finally forged himself strong enough to actually stay alive there. Right when the battle turned loud in his head, Norn caught him. She struck him down and made it brutal clear. Never, ever let your focus slip. Embarrassment hit hard. He rubbed his cheek as she raked his laps over the coals, and the truth finally landed. With a teasing smirk, Norn called him out, said that even with all that strength, he still hadn't grown up yet. Later, under a hush of a quiet sky, the two settled down shoulder to shoulder and stared up as the stars lit up brighter than they ever had. Under the hushed cavern sky, Racy and Norn sprawled side by side, soaking up a rare pocket of peace after the fight was done. Racy shattered the silence and demanded, face burning, if she'd always been trapped alone in this deep, unreachable dungeon. When he looked back at his own fight, he admitted the truth. Beating an Sss-Rank monster cost him countless deaths and pure, relentless grind. When he pressed her about why she never left, Norn's voice went soft as she admitted the brutal truth. She couldn't exit the dungeon at all. Even though the room looked calm, she admitted it wasn't peace that kept her there. It was something deeper. Under the dim cavern sky, Reddy finally understood the truth. Norn couldn't leave this dungeon, not even if she begged. With a soft smile, she confessed she still dreamed of seeing what lies beyond these depths someday. Riai's curiosity snapped toward him when she asked, "So, what's waiting for you out there in the dungeon?" Memories of his old party crashed back in, but bitterness crushed any regret until all that was left was a low, stubborn frustration. After wrestling with his old despair, Ray started asking the scariest question of all. What reason did he even have left to keep living? Ray stared into the blackness, replaying every doubt from his past, until Norn's voice snapped him back to the here and now. With his choice finally locked in, he vowed to escape the dungeon, convinced his real purpose was still waiting out there. Rady couldn't forget Nana Moa, the red-haired girl with steady eyes and a quiet aura, before she stepped into Gunkin Adanwa. Back then, he clung to the name Nanny for her, because they were the same age, trapped together, leaning on each other to survive the fear and find comfort. Every time the traders tried to swing first and take out their rage, she lunged into the front and threw herself between them, shielding Reedy from the worst of the blows. Instead of backing away, Nanny shielded him like a big sister, took every punishment head-on, and kept him safely behind her. Even with her hands shaking and wounds stinging, she met his worried eyes and answered him the same way. Rurai clung to the memory of Nanny's smile, and the vow he'd once sworn to save her the moment danger ever came for her. Even as a slave, her steady kindness held him up, and after he became an adventurer, regret still burned in him for breaking the vow. Steel hardened inside him the moment it clicked. He could finally move, finally act. Yggdrasil's magic flared to life, flooding him with raw power so he could protect her. Months later, Rady pushed deeper through the maze until Nenemoa finally loomed ahead, and on Yggdrasil's 125th floor Rai stopped dead, feeling that eerie familiarity, while pure mental exhaustion dragged heavier than his hard-earned strength. 5 months had gone by, and even with non-stop progress, that far-off exit still looked like it would take years of grueling climbing. Most fights on the way down were left to Rini alone, because he stayed locked in, sprinting upward with one goal in mind. Norn insisted it was training, but she hardly ever fought. She only stepped in when danger finally got serious. Still, every amused little smile she flashed reminded Reddy this brutal ordeal wasn't over yet. It was only halfway to the finish line. As they pushed deeper into the dark, Norn snapped that constant rescues would wreck his training, but then she flashed a smile, because Rennie had grown way stronger. Suddenly, the memories from earlier floors slammed into him, each one painting him in the most embarrassing light, while she just laughed, unbothered by his misery. When Reddy spotted an abandoned bag, he weighed changing out of his stained clothes, because he couldn't let the labyrinth stay filthy. Norn shot forward in a flash, spotted the item right away, and snatched it like it was always hers. On the edge of the cliff, Ray finally clicked. I realized this was the exact spot where he'd fallen before. Norn checked the recovered bag, found it useless, and snapped a warning. Rai had seriously underestimated just how brutal that labyrinth really was. Right before he could speak again, the earth erupted in a violent tremor, and Rai snapped into razor-sharp focus. From the darkness, a colossal serpent surged into view, one he'd already battled in a brutal, deadly clash. Like monster, it wasn't a stranger to him. Still, Rai didn't hesitate. He exploded into a sprint, thinking, I'm not that helpless guy anymore. His blade slammed into the creature's shell-hard body, and even after a shallow cut, he gritted through it, realizing this beast was tougher than the Shadow Viper. Reddy stared at the serpent's body and realized its armor was just a tough outer shell. Beneath it hid softer flesh. Right away, he drove his blade into the opening with razor-precise control. The monster sucked in a breath and then blasted out a brutal surge, flames exploding across the cavern. Then bam, something slammed into him with a crushing impact, rattling the ground, but he refused to budge, digging in and driving that power straight into the. With the dark magic in his wake, he tightened his grip, locked on, and zeroed in on the creature's vulnerable core. The defeated monster crumpled to the ground, dark blood soaking the stone as Rady gulped in breath and shot a look at Norn, begging for the nod. Instead of praising him, she calmly told him, once you break free of the labyrinth, go make friends. Raid blinked at her sudden advice, then leaned in hard as she warned him he'd been reckless, and that he needed real, trustworthy companions by his side. With a bright grin, Norn pushed him to give it everything, like it was no big deal at all. She dropped her eyes and whispered the cold truth, no one can survive by themselves. Staring him down, Norn demanded that Rady look past today because he had a long road ahead, and he needed real friendships or he'd end up alone the moment she was gone. Her words hit him like a punch, and he shot back fast, furious he couldn't even entertain the idea that she might be gone one day. After a short, breath-holding pause, Reddy steadied himself and swore he'd do everything in his power to understand what she truly wanted. Hearing that resolve, Norn's smile lit up, warm and bright, because she could tell just how hard he was determined to push forward. Spying her expression, Reddy flashed back a small, quiet smile. Norn spun around, a soft laugh on her lips, and said just that, while Rissy was still a kid, brushing off his own protests. With a grin burning bright, she pushed him to keep moving, and Rixai matched her pace without a second fight. After he crushed his outside objectives, he made a quiet promise to come back and introduce himself to Norn Mo, bringing along any fresh allies he could find, even Nana Moa. They pushed forward together and hurtled across shattered ground, charging for the upper levels, then hit hard on rough ground. After a rough jolt, they both snapped back into control, steadied themselves, and geared up to keep climbing. After a quick breather, Ray and Norn burst into a light laugh, then pushed straight into the cavern's final stretch. Right ahead, a dazzling doorway lit up the wall, so bright they skid to a stop as Norn confirmed, this is the exit. Relief burst across Ray's face the second he realized, after all that traveling, they'd finally arrived. Norn calmly told him, my part ends here, then pushed him to get out safe without her, revealing that the dungeon's aura forged her body, and that her real self had already died long ago. Norn told him her body was stitched together from pure magic, and if she ever stepped out of the labyrinth, it would vanish on the spot. With that truth hitting him hard, Reddy swallowed his lingering sadness and accepted it. At the exit, their paths had to split. She steadied her nerves and asked him to drop by now and then, because staying there by herself would leave her drowning in loneliness. Determination crushed his hesitation as Reddy swore he'd come back and make sure she'd never feel abandoned again. With fresh resolve burning in his chest, he swore he'd keep that promise and force fate to bring them back together again. Right before Ray slipped through the exit, he locked eyes with Norn one last time. Norn practically begged him to savor the ride and keep charging toward his goal. With a steady smile, she urged him to stay safe, watching him gear up to leave the labyrinth behind. Light blasted his body as he crossed the boundary, and just like that, 3 grueling years on the bottom floor were over. Reddy finally stood outside and realized 5 whole years had slipped by since he'd last seen the outer world. Anxiety gnawed at him, but then excitement surged, pushing him to step forward into the unknown. Bursting out of the dungeon at last, Ray stared at the towering mountains and far-off settlements, and it hit him hard. He'd finally clawed his way back into the outside world. Fresh air blasted into his lungs, and when he tilted his head to the open sky, his whole body surged with the sweet rush of freedom after years trapped below. Behind him, that glowing exit slowly faded away, sealing the truth: one day, he'd have to crawl back through the original entrance to escape. Ruddy steadied his nerves and headed straight for the nearest town, trading off what he had to get cash and snagging himself a fresh set of clothes. Suddenly, an unfamiliar scent hit him, and he froze, like something strange just slipped into the air. Reddy tracked the scent and stumbled on a wounded knight and piles of fallen bodies. And that's when it clicked: monsters were slaughtering people under commands from leaders lurking in the shadows. Then from the darkness, a dragon-like creature roared into view, and as Reddy braced himself, it bared its plan to devour as many humans as it could. A chilling order tore through the air: destroy the capital. Demons swarmed together, salivating for strength and drinking it straight from human blood. Without a second thought, every subordinate snapped to attention. When one of the 4 deadly demons gave the order, the war preparations went into overdrive. Merchants and travelers dropped first, then their goods were ripped away and their bodies lit up in flames, while raid after raid tore through the kingdom's outer roads and left pure devastation behind. Human bodies piled higher and higher, demons kept getting slaughtered in endless waves, and even then they still couldn't gather enough to finally smash the capital. More wagons rolled up, those demons grinned as they slaughtered humans like it wasn't even war anymore, but a routine sport. Fueled by pure thrill, Viggen crouched low with his war axe, whispering death, plunder, and the promise to kill and devour without mercy. Blood drenched the ground as the survivors disappeared, and his shadow beasts feasted in silence on corpses and shattered wagons. A breathless night finally rolled in, and the horror in his eyes snapped into place as recognition screamed, "This is unmistakable." The horn, the weapon, the scars, every detail screamed the truth. Right in front of him stood the infamous Sss-Rank hunter, As the night trembled, Viggen calmly went through his loot, soaking in the rare magical treasures he snagged from the Drake slave company. A blast ripped the carriage apart into splinters, and terrified screams tore through the air as wreckage skittered across the blood-soaked ground. Amid the wreckage, a chained woman trembled, while Viggen realized her potential: that she was high quality, rare, and worth a fortune. Curiosity sparked as he realized they weren't slaves at all. Then, out of nowhere, 2 elite knights revealed themselves, hiding in plain sight as cargo. Night pressed in as fear gripped Vig and Mock, and their instincts screamed for escape, not a fight. He bolted back fast, cursing reality as he warned the capital that monster sacks could slice through armor, so they'd better act now. Turning his back was a death sentence. Viggen's strike slammed in, tearing through his armor with brutal, surgical speed. Blood gushed from the wound as life vanished in an instant, and the fallen one crumpled still on shattered stone. With a cruel laugh at the body, Viggen tore into the Holy Knights, calling them nothing but weak decorations, too pathetic to earn titles and not scary enough to fear. Trembling in iron chains, she stared on in total helplessness, while he coldly brushed the body aside and offered it up to the beasts. Leaning in, Viggen Grimm crept closer. While the night felt wrong, her fear somehow turned her into a feast, and it only sharpened his cruel hunger. Viggen gushed over her beauty, branded her as a pet, vowed her suffering, and then tore into her and devoured her alive. Terror flooded her eyes as she thrashed helplessly, and then she felt his claws, cruel, delighted, and pressing in on her. Echoes of the other captives kept roaring in his head. Every one of them had begged, everyone had served, and not a single soul had been spared. Laughter erupted around the feeding beasts, bones cracked with brutal snaps while Viggen grinned at the chaos tearing through the air. Despair crashed into her the moment his grip tightened. He loved seeing those faces twist under betrayal. Her plea slipped out with a trembling lip. She was grinning, clinging to hope, until that desperate moment snapped into pure agony. A strange guy showed up out of nowhere, calm as ever. Then sunlight flooded the forest as he walked right up and greeted them instantly, like he'd been expected. Shocked silence yanked the demon's grip tight, and that casual tone left both captor and captive staring in pure, crashing confusion. He swore he was lost, then flashed a polite smile and asked her to point him toward the village. Before anyone could even blink, he closed the distance. Viggen's mind spiraled, screaming, how did he move and when? Monster blood splattered across the strange man's ragged clothes, and Viggen's gut immediately screamed that this survivor had crawled out of brutal carnage. A panic-stricken warning tore through the air. She pleaded with him to run, sure Viggen's wrath would slam down fast. His cold gaze pinned hers in place. He didn't flinch once, and somehow he carried this unnerving calm like he was totally detached from everything around him. Viggen smirked with menace, spinning up a twisted plan in his head, and the newcomer's cold indifference only fueled his cruel curiosity. Laughter erupted the moment he pictured cutting him apart slowly, then forcing that girl to watch every brutal second of what came next. Viggen's excitement kept climbing. Just picturing her face twist into horror sent shivers through him, fueled by disgusting anticipation. He laid out a deal. He could walk away, but she'd be stuck there, powerless and alone. To everyone's shock, the man accepted it calmly. No fight, no pause, while Viggen's smirk stared in disbelief, convinced she'd just been thrown away. Eyes trembling with terror, she watched Viggen barrel forward, ready to savor her despair one agonizing second at a time. Her scream tore through the air. Viggen's strike was already too late to be stopped. Ray gets slammed through the air, shattered and powerless, staring down the monster's brutal strength like there's no way out. A beast's glare slices into Ray's teary eyes, and pure fear and crushing despair spill out in silence. The creature lurches forward, reveling in every cruel second. Ray trembles, his heart gets crushed by pure helplessness, and the girls burst into terrified screams. Twisted joy spills into the monster's empty hunger, and Ray's suffering face hooks it, turning that pain into its obsession. Predatory claws creep closer, and the beast drinks in Ray's pain, savoring every silent grimace like it's the best part of the hunt. In the beast's eyes, the world snapped sideways. His head was cut clean off in a single, brutal instant. Terror crashed through him, yet Ray stood stone still, calmly laying out the police decapitation and the whole restoration like it was no big deal. Even after its limbs were torn off, Ray stood there whole again, leaving the creature stunned by healing magic it couldn't possibly explain. Disbelief slammed into the monster. No magic like that could possibly exist, so he tried to force himself to believe it was only an illusion. Once the beast saw Ray's power was real, panic hit hard, and it knew the only way to survive was to bolt out of there without a second of hesitation. Fear smashed into the demon's mind, and even though he desperately craved escape, his legs locked up and wouldn't move. Haunted by demonic doctrine, the vegan froze, because stepping back meant death, and the fate waiting from others was worse than the boy. Pride and desperation ripped through him, and Vegan lunged forward screaming Ray's name, swearing Ray couldn't be that strong, while he bragged about wrecking villages and cutting down knights, convinced his past wins would terrify the silent opponent. Even with his raid, the fight didn't last a heartbeat. Vigon's body slammed into the ground, wiped out. With one final, brutal swing, Ray drove his blade deep, cracking Vigon's arrogance and crushing his demonic pride for good. Cold eyes locked onto trembling fear, and Ray calmly declared, "No room for doubt, that strength is real and it will be undeniable." Clutching his bleeding wound, Vigon staggered back in total disbelief, his whole body shaking under the crushing magical pressure. Ray handed Mercy just one shot, no words, just a silent warning: mess up again and there won't be a second chance. Humboldt the demon gas, he once thought he was the predator, but now he's kneeling under an unstoppable force. Reality slammed into Vigon. He didn't hold the power at all. He wasn't the hunter, he was the prey walking straight towards certain death. After the battle, Ray strode through the wreckage and asked the girl, with a soft voice, if she was really okay. She introduced herself as Liana, the slave, shaking with gratitude after Ray pulled her out of danger. He flinched off her worry and she just stared in awe as his totally healed, once severed, leg looked brand new. With a gentle grin, Ray confessed his classmate Liana stayed stuck in disbelief, pure awe washing over her. Then it hit him, his healing magic wasn't normal at all. Years of daily practice had carved it into his instincts until it became automatic. To slip past suspicion, he redirected the conversation and asked Liana, softly, carefully, what her next move was going to be. A tense beat of silence hung between them as they stood side by side, shaken, uncertain, but somehow stitched together by surviving it all. Memories slammed back into her like a punch, and she reminded him of someone from his past, someone who once protected him without a single second of doubt. He refused to leave her alone. 12. She had no safe place to run back to. A soft smile spread across Liana's face as she pictured Ninamoa's words, cracking into her mind like a proud nod of approval. They both stared at their uncertain futures, then, without a second thought, he reached out and asked her to come along on his journey. She listened in silence as hope lit the way. Maybe, just maybe, together they could carve out a future in the capital. For the first time, she finally blurted out her dream, to help people just like he does. Somewhere far off out of their sight, a lone figure moved through the lab, watching, waiting, and silently gearing up for something. A failed experiment detonated in agony, convulsing and writhing beneath slick tubes and trembling fluid. Lena stared in terror. With a chilling stare, the robed figure tossed the failure aside, then left countless others behind as fuel for the next attempts. Lyanna trembled when the command hit her, and when her number got called, her world jolted. Ray shot his hand out toward Lyanna, pulling her into an unforgettable journey beside him toward destiny. Her breath hitched in shock, and that sudden offer slammed into her chest, heavy with hope she never saw coming. Flanked by the twin blades, he swallowed his fear and silently locked in his resolve, fully accepting the path he'd just chosen. He stared at the horizon, refusing to slow down before the shadows swallowed the last bit of daylight. Today, dressed in borrowed clothes, Ray bolted out, leaving the compensation behind, and set his sights on the capital, where Lena's answer was waiting. Lyanna shut down Ray's offer, convinced trouble would hunt her the moment she showed up, especially with that big risk hanging over him. Ray replayed the demon's terrified retreat in his mind, certain that just his presence alone would scare Vegan off. Even with worry clawing at her, Ray snapped into reassurance, promising she was safe, free, and finally no longer anyone's slave. She said the contract mark proved her master was dead, yet the twisted bond still clung to her like something that refused to let go. Even after she finally broke free, that cursed emblem still bit into her, etched with magic that locked her will and trapped her spirit in place. Letting her go with no plan at all didn't just slip past him. It shattered her future into something uncertain and unstable. If they tore away her identity, she'd be left with nothing, unclaimed, unprotected, just prey, a traded commodity or something even worse, and it all ends with her. Back then, her panic wasn't about saving herself, it was pure urgency, screaming that Ray had to be kept safe. To shield him from the shadowy threats, she kept her distance, not out of weakness, but because her heart chose sacrifice again and again. Ray didn't push her path, he banked on her strength and trusted her to choose freely. Curiosity flared in her eyes as he cautiously launched a request she never saw coming. Instead of turning his back, he offered her a fresh start, one she chose freely, not something she was trapped in. She hesitated and then bit her tongue because now that her former master was dead, those proper rights were impossible to claim. He didn't hesitate, he shot his hand forward, braced for the danger, and sealed a brand new contract. Haunted by the same mark, he finally confessed he'd been hiding it, like the truth proved their fates were still kicking, full of life. That old abandonment scarred him for good, but he shoved it aside, because her worry wasn't something he planned to need. Before she could even hesitate, he lunged in front of her and smashed the first threat. That beast was massive enough to crush hope, but Lyanna didn't get hit. His instincts kicked in and he threw himself between her and the chart. Bursting out of the forest, he saw fresh growling shapes creeping in. Those summoned by the pack hadn't broken apart. Eyes narrowed to slits and blade clenched in his grip, he charged ahead and barked at Lyanna to stay back. Magic erupted in his leg as he dug in hard, using himself as a shield to protect her from the beast's deadly lunge. A blast of packed energy detonated the ground, hurling rubble everywhere and sending wolves scattering in chaos. Darkness cracked open in violent flashes as magical force lanced every incoming threat with surgical precision. Perched on broken rubble, he planted his feet and roared that nobody was getting through, because as long as he was breathing, they wouldn't make it. In the middle of the chaos, he burst forward, slammed into incoming attacks, and struck back hard before the enemies even had a chance to react. From behind, she knew, no doubt, that his power crushed every expectation she'd ever had of a healer. From the battlefield's edge, he took one hard look at the numbers, then tightened his plan and swore he'd switch strategies again. Without a second thought, he lunged forward, pouring his fear into magic just like he'd done back when he stood with Valkyrie. Right before he could even move, Lyanna exploded into the fight, lunging in and cutting down enemies with fearless, earth-shaking force. After landing that decisive strike, she shook with disbelief, staring at her hands and whispering, "Did I really do it?" Without a single pause, she planted herself in place and vowed, no backing down, she'd fight right beside him. Even though alarm bells rang, she pushed through it, explaining her training despite being green, and vowing she wouldn't back down once real battle hit. Ray never saw this coming, combat skills from someone who'd been enslaved for 5 years, changing so much that just looking different didn't even cover it. When the monsters surged in, her chest clenched with sharp fear, but she still lifted her blade anyway. He clocked her weakness, surged forward, and cleaved the beast right in its leap while yanking her to safety. Ray felt Lyanna drowning in fear, so he snapped his hidden aura loose and slammed it into the monster to end its rampage. A deadly wave of spirits detonated behind him, welding into a monstrous beast that shattered the enemy's nerve. Dark creatures erupted in panic, scattering like sparks as they fled into the forest, while Ray stood guard over Weena, shielding her without a shred of fear. As she gripped his clothes, flustered to the max, Lyanna blurted out an apology for collapsing again, because she really meant to hold it together. Even with her cheeks burning, she thanked him from the bottom of her heart, and Ray's suspicion was confirmed. This girl trusted him completely. Ray snapped to the truth. Lyanna was throwing herself into danger, convinced she'd turned into a burden on him. To make her stay, Ray cooked up a lie, fake memory loss from the past years. He shrugged off what he'd missed, then begged Lyanna to teach him everything she knew, no matter what it took. But under that request, he was chasing the real prize, learning what happened, and tracking down a girl named Nene. Ray stepped in with a bold offer, protection and payment included, and when he slid that contract across the table, Lyanna froze, stunned by how real and unexpectedly sincere he was. With a straight-up, honest stare, Ray confessed he didn't need any grand reason, just the simple truth that he needed her. Lena froze solid, eyes blazing wide, completely mute, shocked that someone was actually betting their life on the very present she's holding. Her silence stretched for a heartbeat, then she nodded softly. Ray's shoulders dropped, and he smiled like a weight finally lifted. With gratitude burning in her chest after being saved, Lyanna nodded and signed the contract, and the two of them shared words that sealed the outcome. They sealed their pact with a firm handshake and a shared symbol, forging a bond so unbreakable it felt like fate. Lyanna snapped up the contract with bright, eager excitement, ready to serve, while Ray's smile faltered as awkward discomfort kept creeping in. Ray made it crystal clear to himself control wasn't the point. Real, practical reasons drove his choices. With that contract locked in, he could guard her better than ever, boosting her chances to survive by tapping into their shared power. They clasped hands in a stiff, formal handshake, locking in their partnership and agreeing to treat each other as equals. Even after he begged her to stop, she kept calling him Sama, and Ray instantly crumbled into embarrassment while Lyanna just stood there, sweetly clueless. They pitched their camp under the trees and pushed everything else aside, focusing on keeping her comfortable instead of chasing the rest of the distance. Lyanna swallowed her guilt over the delay, terrified that deadly monsters would creep out under the cover of night. To calm her fears, Ray confessed he was wiped out too, urging her to crawl into the tent and rest. As he sparked the fire, he couldn't believe her. She knew everything, even with her past and her high status. Suddenly, she spilled the truth, and it was worse than anything they imagined. They'd been unknowingly setting up camp right inside the infamous Serval Beast territory. Lyanna told Ray they were deep in central Serval territory, south of the capital, and Ray froze in a heartbeat. He replayed the map in his head, and then it hit him hard. He'd busted out on the dungeon's exact opposite side. Yggdrasil's labyrinth sank deeper than anyone figured, slinging him way farther than he ever planned or even dared to imagine. While they finally rested, Lyanna's mind flashed back to her early training, where she'd witnessed a Holy Knights match firsthand. Against that earlier battle, Ray's power blew past those knights. She moved faster, and her control was razor-sharp. Leona was sure even the elite knights couldn't keep up with Ray's razor instincts and his unmatched battle rhythm. Her honest opinions snapped the world into focus, leaving him wide-eyed, and she hadn't missed a single thing during their journey together. With a gentle smile, she slipped him quiet praise, and in that moment she was sure he'd already outmatched the toughest warriors she'd ever laid eyes on. Flustered, she stumbled backward, nerves buzzing, while Ray soaked up the compliment, grateful she trusted him. Suddenly, a chilling sound tore through the air, and both of them whipped their heads toward the pitch-black depths of the forest. The sudden noise spiked their nerves, and they both snapped around in a rush. Panic surged hard just as Lyanna feared a fresh monster attack. He reined her back with a sharp command, because the danger in the air felt even worse than the last time. He charged into the forest solo, not even a second to think, and left Lyanna behind as her voice rose in anger. Deeper inside, armored boots thundered with a chilling rhythm, like something massive had just arrived and demanded attention. At last, a silver-haired warrior burst onto the scene, his cold gaze pinning a rival as he pointed toward an unseen destination. Before the sealed gate, the legendary Sss-Rank party stood ready, staring down the dream door like it was about to change everything. With Kanata the white magician stepping in, their leader slammed down a bold declaration. This crew was stronger than ever. Confident and unshaken, he lifted his voice, then barreled into the dungeon and led the charge straight into death. Months earlier, a divine emblem shimmered inside Valent Castle, guarding the royal capital like a watchful guardian. Then the hero came home after years, grinning as he recalled how his party, Gunkanadingwa, had proudly earned their rank status. Only a precious handful slipped into these sacred halls, where royalty laid out their judgment, served only to those lucky enough to get the rare invitation. Every time he came back to those familiar stone steps, the silence hit him hard, like the past was whispering, reminding him that divinity once walked right among mortals. Up in the highest seat, the divine king demanded absolute loyalty and roared that war was necessary, so demons could never sully sacred soil. With divine justice booming from his throne, the king demanded the demon lord's death and handed the job to Loki. That day, Loki Vajradar's crew, Gunkanadingwa, finally ripped themselves free of adventurer status for good. Out of 4 marching squads, only Loki's crew managed to snatch the top rank the throne would ever grant. Their dominance was plain to see, and envy sparked in every rival's eyes as Loki soaked up all that attention with smug satisfaction. He swore to wipe out the demon lord with zero doubt, and somehow that vow got him tossed out by the court, but also praised by the king. With unshakable conviction, the whole party snapped to attention and saluted the king's command in perfect unity. Loki let out a shaky breath of relief when the ceremony finally wrapped up, sealing the status he'd been craving for ages. Each rank flashed back to the dungeons he'd conquered, earned through brutal grind, blood-soaked battles, and almost dying over and over again. Right as he stepped out, a familiar voice shouted his name, snapping him to attention in the hallway like he'd just been caught off guard. Praise erupted from every corner as Loki's peers gawked at his raw strength, stunned that a kid so young had pulled off such a rare feat. Euphoria crashed through him, and all that praise lit a secret thrill he'd been dying to feel. Nearby adventurers swapped stories about the rewards of Sss-Rank, completely oblivious to the fact that he was starving for recognition. He flashed a humble smile, credited his comrades for the win, and secretly basked in every sweet word of praise. Gratitude vanished fast as arrogance surged. He insisted they were nothing without his all-powerful leadership. They cheered him on, praised his raw strength, and watched their hopes spike, imagining his team standing toe-to-toe with generals or cutting down the undead terror. Loki flashed a soft smile, hiding his doubts behind polite, determined promises that he'd follow through no matter what. Once he was alone, his polite mask slipped and frustration finally surfaced, because those undead were never going to fall just because he had unrealistic hopes. And there it was, an undead nightmare, a monster with poison-slick flesh and no-kill cores, mutating into even more terrifying shapes with every breath. Even the elite knights got crushed, each opponent surged with brutal speed, and staying alive became basically impossible for any adventurer. Quietly, he confessed the brutal truth. Even if the hero struggled, survival by itself would have been nothing short of a miracle. Undead terror, the kind that only shows up in Sss-Rank dungeons, stays off their radar as they push forward on this mission. Confidence surged through him as he convinced himself that creatures like these were nothing more than a wild fantasy, nowhere near the paths they'd ever realistically follow. Suddenly, the dream door of death dungeon burst open with chaos, and a monstrous beast tore into the nightmare with brutal fury. Himano darted forward and launched a perfectly timed counterattack, landing every move like their plan promised. After Himano's flawless hit, their teammate erupted in praise, shouting that she'd just crushed the whole assault. Charging straight in, the warrior exploded into a reckless assault, blades blazing as they slammed against the monster's brutal, thick hide. Loki barked in pure frustration when his comrade lunged in headfirst, rushing straight into danger with zero coordination and no thought. A lightning-fast counter-strike hit with deadly precision, snapping the attacker mid-swing before anyone could even blink or rush in. Dozens of monstrous jaws burst from nowhere in one violent wave, screaming and lunging so hard they swallowed the whole battlefield in raw, unstoppable force. Magicians gritted their teeth, snapping spells into place and pouring power from afar to keep their overwhelmed allies standing. Loki snapped a barrier around the monster and, with the finishing blow ready in his grip, declared the kill before launching the strike. Even with clear instructions, the warrior still couldn't read the monster for what it was, and Loki's frustration started boiling over. A furious argument erupted as everyone shouted for the correct tactics, but the attacker doubled down. Reckless success, he insisted, proved he was right about everything. Tension snapped through the group, mistrust crawled in, and with every delay that dragged on, their coordination crumbled fast. On Loki's side, the argument finally died down. Regrouping would have to wait, because a brutal stretch through the darkness still lay ahead. Deep inside the Sss-Rank dungeon, a colossal sealed gate stamped with the dream door of death loomed in deadly silence. Years ago, 50 starry-eyed miners marched into that tunnel chasing riches. Then every last one vanished without a single survivor. Now Gonkanadang stepped into elite party mode, pushed forward with one goal: crack the mystery and take on the deadly ruin head-on. Strange flowers froze the chaos. Inside Fail paused, and to everyone's shock, he knelt calmly in that eerie silence. Those rare blooms only grow in snowy wastelands or where wild magic burns, and every one of them screams that something massive is hidden in. Himeno's instincts screamed that something terrifying was lurking, and the flower's eerie presence confirmed a brutal monster was buried deep within. Loki stared at the dungeon's rank, gut-checking it hard, because what if it wasn't just built for rank monsters and something far nastier was waiting inside? The Sword Saint's blessing blared a warning. Something far stronger was coming. Then it surged through Gymno's body, turning him into a weapon meant to fight even the impossible odds. Even with everyone warning him to stop, Loki dug in his heels and pushed forward without pause. Feeling untouchable from past wins, the crew followed along, but Loki's smug voice grated on all their nerves. Kanata shrugged off the praise, claiming she was just sitting in 20th, way behind the legendary healer who held the coveted first rank. The second Loki heard Rei's name, his blood turned to ice. Like the name itself dragged up memories of a forgotten teammate from their old party. Shock slammed into Loki's mind. He couldn't wrap his head around it. That clumsy dropout was suddenly the top-ranked white. Kanata praised Rei's tactical genius, remembering how he carried entire teams on his back without leaning on any normal healing spells. While the others laughed at Rei for not being able to heal, Loki stayed quiet and fought through the silence, trying to uncover the real truth behind him. The cruel mockery from his teammate gave Loki the perfect cover to quietly agree. Rei's weakness fit their plan too perfectly. Rei didn't chase power, he obsessed over it, forging ruthless techniques that shielded his allies while spending almost no magic. Kanata's praise poured out like thunder, and it kept rattling Loki worse and worse, because that exile had her reverence carved in stone. It didn't just move fast, it rewrote what healing could do, instantly snapping severed limbs back in place, blowing any normal white mage out of the water. Doubt crawled into Loki's mind as he dug through their past, and a chilling thought hit. Maybe Rei was the reason they'd grown this far. In the dead quiet, guilt surged to the surface, and only now did it finally hit. Nobody had truly understood how powerful those raised abilities really were. Now, even veteran white mages once crumbled under pressure, couldn't focus their healing magic while pulling enemy fire. Most of them didn't even understand anatomy. One wrong move during a cast could turn healing into fresh, worse wounds. Regret burned in Rei's chest as his skill blew past every truth they'd been blindly swallowing without question. Himeno screamed in panic, sensing a disaster closing in, and that sudden warning jolted the whole group into a frantic scramble for cover. Then the whole room went silent, because the air turned heavy and something massive came crashing in, and it wasn't just another floor monster. Energy blasted through the cave, proving it wasn't a rank. Her blessings roared with the kind of shrink dread that made you feel doomed. The monster unleashed memories of past battles that came crashing back, same terrifying presence they'd felt in Yeeg the Dressel before. Loki stepped forward without flinching, voice rock steady, and declared that their power had grown. Now they were ready to strike back. Every member snapped to attention when Loki called, ready to charge into battle even as fear squeezed their hearts tight. Bursting out of the shadows, the monster finally showed itself, twisted humanoid flesh wrapped around pulsing black energy that radiated pure evil. Shock slammed through the group when they finally locked eyes with a foe they'd never seen before. They called it the Undead Terror, and it became a legend after it wiped out legendary heroes even though they never had a full party at their backs. Loki's eyes narrowed. This monster could talk, so maybe, just maybe, it could be reasoned with. They surged forward as one, unleashing every last ounce of power to prove they could stand toe-to-toe with the legendary hero party. Beneath a silent, moonlit sky, another shadow slipped through the forest, moving with razor-focused intent. He caught a stench up ahead and confirmed it with his own nose. This was the absolute worst kind of trouble. In front of him, the liquid undead terror erupted, unstable, grotesque, and itching to sink its teeth into some terrified prey. 2 years back, Phil stood there frozen in place, replaying the moment that ripped her life clean in two. She charged straight into the Dressel's Labyrinth, the terrifying Sss-Rank dungeon, while Ray shouted her name from behind. Back then, Ray slipped her a butterfly clip, plain as day, but somehow loaded with meaning deeper than it looked. He handed it to her as a birthday gift, his heart overflowing with gratitude for her unseen kindness and steadfast support. Even when doubt clawed at her, Ray pulled her back and reminded her of the one truth that never changed: she'd always been his strength through every single hardship. She flashed a warm smile at Ray's kindness, but guilt clawed at her thoughts. She couldn't shake the feeling that her own strength just wasn't enough. Even after Ray warned everyone, no one heard her quiet efforts that kept the whole party from falling apart. They laughed him off as useless bait, they said, then mocked his healing magic like it was a joke, even though it never once managed to activate. Ray's non-stop effort got twisted into proof that he didn't measure up, like he had to carry a burden just to earn his right to stand there. When he realized words wouldn't change a thing, Phil stopped talking and just sat there in silence, watching everything unfold. A sudden run-on jolted Phil to attention, because a mysterious girl stepped in and demanded to know why she was hanging around the dungeon. With a playful wink, Norn bragged that she ran the dungeon like her own secret garden, loose, fearless, and completely unbothered. Phil froze in place, trapped by some unseen magic, because Norn was dead serious. If she went in without strength, she'd die. And that's when it hit her. Something familiar surged inside her, magic flaring as she remembered her from a visit years ago. Even with Yggdrasil's danger glaring in her face, Thiel refused to back off, because some unfinished something kept yanking her straight toward its shadowed entrance. With eyes blazing from panic, Theo shouted that they had to track down Ray no matter what it cost. But guilt crushed her, and shaky, she confessed that Ray probably didn't see her as someone worth remembering anymore. Even then, you could see it. She'd rather die than let anything stop her from reaching him. Even with that grit, she still couldn't shake the truth. If she threw herself into the abyss, it wouldn't pull Ray back. Norin crushed her fears with one brutal, simple truth: Ray was still alive, somewhere hidden inside Yggdrasil. According to Norn, Ray stayed perfectly healthy, but for now, she decided to move into the dungeon and never look back. Relief hit her like a wave. After all that pain, she finally realized Ray hadn't disappeared. Quiet sniffles slipped out of her as Narn clocked it. Ray still had someone out there who was genuinely falling apart, worrying about him. Thiel didn't even flinch. He shoved a rucksack into Norn's hands and demanded she stash it near the waterfall. Even though Ray might never use it, she still prayed he'd catch what it all meant. Norn slid a rare soul stone into the hero's hands and made it clear down in those dungeon depths it was worth a fortune. So Phil leaned in and asked for just one thing: if Ray ever comes back, she's gotta take care of him. She flashed a grateful smile at Norn, then swore she'd never set foot in Jursal again. Even with peace sitting in her chest, guilt still gnawed at her, because her past betrayal could never be undone. A sudden battle erupted into full-blown chaos. Fail was called in as magic tore everything apart, and screams filled the air. Magic still burned inside her, but the undead terror was too fast. There wasn't a single moment to land a hit. Right before she could unleash her spell, the enemy hit her unprotected side with a brutal strike that rocked her to the core. Her body got hurled across the battlefield, and her comrades erupted in terror and rage, screaming like the end was here. Shock slammed across his face as he stared at her, bloodied, barely conscious, and still barely holding on. The monstrous enemy surged in, zero mercy, crashing toward him like a wrecking ball. And then one brutal strike slammed the warrior into stone while the creature sneered at just how fragile humans really are. Two more adventurers stood there like statues, terror locking their bodies in place as the terrifying creature spun straight toward them. It didn't hesitate for a second, picked its next victim, and launched the attack before they even had time to blink. Metals burst into every direction as the strike tore through his armor and defenses in an instant. All that was left was a severed arm slamming into the ground. So shocking, the young swordsman froze in stunned silence. A brutal sting detonated in her chest, and when she looked down, shock hit her hard because she could see the blood. A jolt shot through the whole group. No one ever thought their strongest ally would get taken down that fast. Right when nobody could catch their breath, the girl's voice snapped. She warned him that the danger was already barreling toward them. Glass exploded midair as his arm shot up on instinct, but the blade still ripped through flesh before he could even fully defend himself. Crimson's strike erased her from existence like she never existed, while everyone else stood there, frozen in raw horror. More agonizing screams ripped through the silence as she bolted to the fallen leader's side. He trembled, battered and bleeding for days, while her frantic voice clawed at his mind, trying to pull him back to focus. Panic crushed her as reason fled, and she pleaded with the towering figure for mercy, desperately stalling for time as the inevitable strike bore down on her. He dropped to his knees and begged, offering up anything, even betrayals and sacrifices, just to buy himself a little more time. The woman stared down at him with ice in her eyes, her disgust curling her lips as his pitiful final cry fell apart. The air snapped and went heavy, right as blades came flying at her like a storm. Flames exploded out of the enemy's spell, blasting her back as panic surged, and she scrambled to shield herself. In the flicker of firelight, the file pushed its way through the smoke, bruised, battered, but still standing strong, ready to guard the last shred of hope. With pain ripping through her, she screamed at Kanata to lock in on healing. Then she stayed on the front line, refusing to break. With fate closing in, she clenched her teeth and charged ahead, ready to pay whatever price came from leaving her friend behind. Blood sprayed as her body was pierced, and regret hit the moment it was already far too late to fix anything. Memories crashed into her like a wave: fear, betrayal, and Ray, the one who once swore they were bound together, even when that bond felt fragile. Fear of death clamped down on her so hard it drowned out loyalty, and right then, Ray needed support too. Acceptance finally flooded her heart, and every painful consequence she'd paid for started to feel like it was earned, because the final atonement was made. As Ray's sight began to fade, that warm smile came back, soft, forgiving, and laced with the gentle way he said her name. Then Loki jolted awake out of nowhere, dizzy and drained, clawing at his memories like, how did I even end up in this bed? Fragments of Lim's memories crashed back in: his gut punch of a loss, the roar of battle chaos, and the terrifying, unstoppable power of the undead terror. A calm woman stepped forward and introduced herself, then explained what the clinic could do, and exactly where their healing magic ran out. She chose Ray as the only person who could bring back what Loki had truly lost. Accusations rained down right after the killing of her comrade, a grave crime, and the name Ray hit with shocking power the moment she said it. Suspicion roared to life when 5 white mages were found dead, even though they'd been guarding the safest position on the battlefield. Proof of Loki's betrayal surfaced: Kanata's report ripped open S.H.I.E.L.'s secret move, allies paid the price with their lives, and then the worst blow hit: friends turned against them. His frantic explanations fell on deaf ears. Those accusations landed like fatal blows, and trust shattered for good. Seeing that list of horrors: coma, blindness, and missing limbs, Loki finally started to grasp what his choices would cost. Once Gunkino Dangwa was celebrated, but now its leader stood in disgrace, staring down a truth he could finally no longer dodge. And just like that, everything around him crumbled into nothing. Those words sank in deeper than any blade ever could. A thunderclap slammed into the forest, shattering the silence and rattling every tree under the pale, watchful moon. From the shadows, 2 beams of pure energy tear across the sky, carving the air with blazing vapor trails. Ray charged straight at the grotesque monster, its shifting bulk writhed, and serpentine limbs snapped and pulsed with chaotic magic. That creature's gaping mouth hissed madness, promising sick little games soaked in terror, while its breath crawled out reeking of rot. Ray's eyes narrowed like blades. He recognized that cursed essence instantly, a chilling liquid-type corruption beast. The creature's body spasmed violently, its shape tearing apart as bubbling masses and snapping tendrils surged into wild, chaotic motion. Ray watched it heal at crazy speed, and his knife proved useless against a monster soaked in consumed magic. Even with the odds stacked against him, Ray shot forward and slammed his blades through the wet, living flesh with ruthless, pinpoint precision. As he dodged and slipped away, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Why the hell would a monster like this crawl into a backwater low-tier region? They called it the Reciter of the Dead, an alive, breathing nightmare so terrifying that only a brave few dared to even speak its name. This thing has no business being down in the low-level zones. Creatures like it only lurk near the Demon Lord's castle. Ray still remembered that monster's earlier broadcast, sending out a clear signal, begging him to come closer. He demanded to know why all this was being staged, with someone pulling the strings, like the creature was nothing more than a setup for a test. If it was controlled, that power coming from the source was terrifying, strong enough to be a demon lord or some other top-tier entity. Ray knew he couldn't sniff out the observer, so he slammed the brakes off his plan and decided to end the fight fast. No hesitation. Ray snaps back. Leon can't afford to hesitate right now, because this monster doesn't just cross the line, it blows past the S-rank level. Right in the face of death, Ray rips open the cursed power buried deep inside his corrupted magical core and unleashes it all. The earth bucks as his aura surges outward, and with a single strike he erases the creature's probing tendrils on the spot. Ray darts in with razor-precise steps and a reversed grip, then slams his blade straight into the monster's core. A surge of cursed energy detonates through the beast, and it tears apart in seconds under pure, destructive magic. Ray rockets out of the sky like a meteor, slamming the earth so hard it cracks open, and it tears through the enemy with her. The battlefield goes eerily quiet as Ray calmly locks onto every flicker in the monster's dissolving, chaotic form. His gaze snaps to a faint pulse. Right in the center, the exposed core glows like it's calling him in. Rage surging, Ray gathers cursed aura and fires his ultimate move, Aura Lance Ray, shaping pure light into a piercing lance that cuts the air. Ray locks onto his target with zero hesitation, then with one last declaration, he slams the spell through to completion. Even with everything wrecked, the monster's rage still burns hot, and it lunges with one last, desperate strike straight at Ray. Ray surges ahead and dumps every last ounce of magic into his lamp. His focus snaps razor-sharp with deadly precision. Aura Lance rips through its body, flesh, bone, and even the darkness get wiped out in a single, brutal blast. Smoke drifts over the crater as Ray stands alone, clutching the shattered core with a quiet, crushing victory. He studies core from every angle, then decides to hang onto it, either to craft something new or to cash in later. From behind the trees, Liana bursts out, panting hard, eyes wide with shock after the final explosion rocks everything. Eyes blazing, she rockets ahead, stunned speechless that Ray just shut it down so easily. Her astonishment kept surging as he executed a one-strike full dodge, his power blowing past every single expectation she had. Even with the undead terror looming over him, Ray had already survived nightmares way worse in the deeper layers of the Yggdrasil labyrinth. As night crashes in, they drop their guard and settle down, plotting their next move for tomorrow, deeper and deeper into the dungeon. Ray sinks into silent thoughts until Leon's voice snaps him back from the edge of his own mind. He hesitates for a beat, then casually tosses out, "Once we hit the capital, you've gotta eat sweets with me." Leona's eyes light up, nervous as hell but totally ready, and as Ray's proposal sinks in, she nods and agrees, a huge smile breaking across her face. As the sky darkened, Ray pushed them to set up camp nearby, then Lyanna suddenly blurted a desperate, urgent shout. Out of nowhere, she bolts from the trees, breath tearing in her chest, as she's found a village hiding past the woods. Massive stone walls shoot up around them, silent, unbreakable, and clearly built to guard a hidden settlement. Leona crumples from exhaustion, but she fires back, saying she's totally fine, and Ray shuts it down like it's crystal clear. That villain is locked behind walls, no doubt. They take a hard look at those towering protective walls, and can't shake the feeling they're hiding divine stuff built to drive monsters back for good. They sprinted back toward the perimeter, no entry anywhere in sight, so they agreed to hunt down the gate. A towering gate looms ahead. Lyanna steps up and volunteers to beg for entry, while Ray hovers nearby, tense and on guard. Ray abruptly halts Leon and throws up a warning. Right before Leon can step toward the gate, he tells her about the trap lurking in the shadows. Divine magic surges through the gate. Anyone carrying monstrous mana slams into a brutal rejection the moment they make contact. Even with altered magic like Ray, humans can still get crushed, so when his arms start to fade, he silently knits them back together. Lyanna blurts out an apology, completely unaware the gate is messing with her, while Ray leans in and tells her softly that this is her very first divine encounter. Out of nowhere, a magical eye materialized in the air, scanning them one by one with ruthless, divine surveillance magic to confirm they were really there. The gate creaks open at last, their approval seals the moment, and they slip spin on cautious feet toward a village wrapped in mystery. A hooded figure barrels forward out of nowhere, and Ray whips around on instinct as Lena screams in full panic. Weapons drop as the guard sizing them up, then he confirms it. Neither one is a disguised human threat. Once the guards lose interest, the armored sentry takes one look at the check and waves the two right through the gates. Atra steps forward and drops the truth. He's not some old guardian at all. He's a young holy knight, diamond rank. Even with Atra's age on his side, every move screams mastery. Only someone attuned to divine power can wield gates like that. He drops a sincere apology and shows up even as the restaurants are shut, then offers water and swears he'll make it up with discounted lodging. Ray greets them both with respect, and they waste no time thanking Atra for getting the gate open so late. When Atra hears they're crossing the forest, disbelief hits like a truck. Surviving that path is insanely rare. Right before the questions roll in, Atra freezes mid-sentence, then admits the village is tangled in a dangerous problem with no answers yet. Atra locks onto the truth. This crafty demon has been hunting this village for months, striking without mercy. This enemy isn't some ordinary beast, it's a werewolf with a human soul and a deadly hunger that makes it terrifyingly dangerous. The villagers live in non-stop terror. Anyone who runs into the werewolf usually doesn't come back, so no one gets to tell what they saw. Even with that Sss-Rank label, nobody's national forces has shown up, so yeah, that threat might be way scarier than everyone thinks. Ray snaps into analysis, because even 4 diamond rank knights can't pin down that slippery beast. Fangs snapped out and claws shot forward as the werewolf surged into its rampage, leaving many brave knights lifeless in its wake. News hit like a punch. 3 werewolves were roaming through starving villages, trapped by fear and too scared to call for outside help. Hope died fast. 4 holy knights vanished, and not a single reinforcements came pouring in through the capital's gates. Even with fear hanging over them, a new nightmare popped up. Ray and Lena leaned in, listening hard as tension snapped tighter between sips. While the werewolves' residents vanished one by one without a trace, a darker secret crawled behind the village wall. Disappearance cases started creeping through the village, quiet as death, leaving behind nothing but dread, no blood, no screams, and not a single shred of evidence. While everyone else brushed the suspicion aside, Ray kept it to himself, quietly rejecting the official story and feeling something way darker lurking beneath it. He finally said it out loud. There's a secret collaborator inside the village, and they're steering the werewolf from the shadows. Moments later, a shadowy figure burst over the wall and vanished into thin air before anyone could even catch them. In the werewolves' den, their leaders leaned in, baffled. How did Ray, just one human, take down their warrior Vesan? Alpha, Cloak, and Shadow slipped out without a sound, stepping into the world as one of the infamous, feared 4 deadly demons. A cold grin crawled under his hood, spilling twisted glee and signaling the chaos that was about to explode. Relinked the missing villagers to 3 werewolves, and it screamed one thing: there was a darker scheme lurking under the surface. Atro greeted Ray like a long-lost friend and spilled urgent village news, right as Ray had just stepped in moments ago. 2 kids, Shu and Liz, rolled in with dinner in hand, their warm smiles lighting up the whole group. Curious about the kid, Ray leaned in and asked if they were Atra's. He just gave a low chuckle and shook his head, denying it. Atra leaned in and told them plainly those kids were the innkeeper's own. Liz and Shu smiled and introduced themselves right away, like they had nothing to hide at all. Ray introduced himself, and as Liana turned bright red, that tiny, cheerful hello and firm little handshake totally caught her off guard. Then Atro told them straight up that he'd stay at his post, so Shu and Liz had to deliver meals every single day. The moment they heard their DB guests, the kids practically buzzed with excitement, eager to lead Ray and Lena straight to the inn. Without a second thought, they snatched Liana's hand and yanked her forward. She staggered, clearly drowning in panic. As they strolled, Atra dropped the bombshell. This inn was run by their mom, right around the corner. With Atra's praise lighting a fire in him, Ray took her suggestion and promised to stay the night. Snow drifted down over the village as the group hurried toward the inn. Shu and Liz smashed through the door and shouted that new customers had finally arrived. Innkeeper Shinoka greeted them with open arms, catching her breath as she rushed out apologies for showing up so suddenly. She thanked them with real feeling, then admitted that lately hardly any guests dared to show up, because demon threats kept creeping in nearby. Men once stormed out hunting rescue, but they died the moment they stepped into danger, and the village shut its gates for good, silence swallowing everything. Suspicious werewolves prowled nearby, their demonic instincts blazing so hard that running for freedom felt nearly impossible without going full-on careful. Even with Ray's sharp senses on full blast, he didn't feel a single demon lurking anywhere during his entire approach. To dig deeper, Ray grilled them about the deaths that hit over the last few months and the strange goings-on in that village. As Ray kept watch and their senses on full alert, Lyanna snapped into action, sorting every clue and gearing up to dig into the hidden threat deeper. 3 months back, the werewolves tore into the world, and the very first one to disappear was a young woman out there hunting solo. Her severed head sat right in front of the divine gate, and that's when the truth hit. Something monstrous had swallowed her whole. Villagers banded together to hunt, then sent scouts ahead, only for both plans to get wiped out fast and brutally. Ray grimly stared as the case vanished from sight, knowing it all likely started with that first brutal werewolf massacre. Even with divine protection standing guard, 28 men vanished without a trace, and not a shred of evidence ever showed that werewolves had slipped past the village barrier. Once the werewolves rolled in, the disappearances started, and a trust got convinced a traitor was hiding in their ranks. Ray took the threat dead serious. What if that infiltrator was hiding as a werewolf, or worse? Just as their thoughts spun out of control, Shinoka popped in and with perfect politeness announced that dinner was ready. They just froze in silence, both stunned by the ridiculously generous meal, and they couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was hiding behind it. Even with the food shortage still biting, they got a full feast. Yet as they chewed, gratitude barely covered the suspicion creeping into their eyes. After they thanked everyone, Shinoka suddenly excused herself, slipped out in silence, and left the room behind. Mouths watered as hungry village kids came running at the smell, then shrank back and stammered apologies while their growling stomachs betrayed the shame. They confessed they only ate bread, and those harsh limits keep them from ever getting full meals on a regular basis. Ray quietly handed over his untouched share to both kids, and the moment their eyes locked on it, joy and disbelief hit them like a wave. But only if they promised one thing: split everything fair and square, no bickering, no fights, just equal sharing between them. Bright smiles exploded across both faces as the kids eagerly snatched up Ray's generous, heartfelt gift. Shinoka burst in, frozen by what she saw, because she didn't know the meal was given with a purpose. When she suggested she deduct the bill, Ray stayed cool and made her take the full payment instead. Lyanna gently reminded her that the food was meant for them, and the woman's worries melted away. Ray watched Atra win the kids over, building real trust even while everything felt hard and unsure. According to Shinoka, Atra probably felt a wave of gratitude for Ray's quiet passion. The meals the kids carried weren't just kindness, they stitched a warm little haven right between shattered hearts. In a drawer, gray, half-buried letters and little trinkets sat there, silent leftovers of a family that used to be loved. Those cherished lives were snuffed out by a demon, leaving him to face the trial alone, drowning in grief. He never even managed to speak it out. Shu and Liz were hit with memories of kids their age, now gone for good, forever out of reach. Even though he knew his family's town was staring down danger, Atra clenched his resolve and stayed, ready to fight and shield the village with everything he had. Losing everything didn't stop him. As the divine treekeeper, he pushed forward without a single second of doubt. As night crept in, Ray got ready to sleep, quietly praying he'd get a private room instead. Trying to get a grip on what was happening, Ray panicked as Lena demanded they just share one. While Ray was busy unpacking, he thought he'd sleep on the floor, until Lena suddenly dragged the bath into the conversation. Lena stood there, nerves sparking in her chest, trying to find the right words after that meal she'd quietly adored. She finally confessed Ray's food was hers to begin with, and she hadn't taken a single bite. Even after he apologized, she stayed cool and told him the truth. She'd been making it on dried meat and basically nothing else. Her voice turned gentle, like she never even got hungry, and she swore he had absolutely nothing to regret. Ray tore open his past, back when he was a child slave, starving day after day with food always just beyond his reach. Somewhere out there, a stranger once rescued his fellow slave girl, and even while she starved, she still shared her food with him. Remembering her kindness, Ray finally decided to pay it forward, passing that same compassion to someone else. Lyanna clocked his selflessness and hit him with kind words that left him totally blindsided. The kid's laughter still rang in his head, like those gestures could never be erased that easily. Ray gently saw right through Lyanna's self-doubt, and he could tell she craved reassurance. way more than she'd ever say out loud. Over time, she learned to move like every second mattered, always on alert, always holding herself back, because one slip could ruin everything. Staring at that branded mark, he realized her training wasn't built for freedom at all. It was designed for luxury. Runes sank deep into her soul, so she instinctively threw up her guard the same way Ray once did, back when she was still weak. Even after she was free from slavery, he still found her bound by chains that lived in her heart, choking the emotional ropes he was desperate to cut. Her name slid off his lips like a promise, and he was already bracing to shake her whole world. Ray calmly broke down the contract's terms from the start, shutting down any idea that one of them was going to dominate the other. Lyanna froze, totally thrown by his kindness, not knowing what to do with a freedom that big. He softly reached out, patted her head, and told her, "You're safe, no need to be scared." Even while magic shackled them, Ray refused to sit back. She wanted Lyanna to seize her own future, not live as someone else's property. Later, when the steam curled up in eerie quiet, Ray stared into the calm and realized it had been ripped apart by lurking werewolf chaos. While Ray sank into a deep, relaxing bath, Lyanna slipped in right after him, completely clueless that someone was already in there. Panic slammed into him the moment she showed up in nothing but a towel, and the both of them froze, pure embarrassment burning between them. Lena froze on the spot, breath catching as her heart slammed in her chest the moment she saw Ray like that. She shoved it in his face that she asked first, yet somehow they both landed right in this painfully awkward mess. Ray panicked when he finally caught the misunderstanding, too late, because Lena burst out of the room, stammering a shaky, flustered apology as she ran. Driven to make her point, she shot back nervously, insisting the only reason she came was to help him clean the right way. He shut the offer down on the spot, cutting in hard with the same promise again and again. He never, ever wanted a servant with her. Leon choked up with guilt, admitting he leaned on him too much, then begged him, "Please, finally, let me be useful." Then Ray's mind flashed back to his own past, and he finally got why she was terrified of being left behind, or cast out like she didn't matter. He accepted her offer with a hesitant nod, keeping his voice calm as he asked for help washing his back only. Without warning, she barreled in, all fired up, only to completely misread what kind of help was actually there. He panicked and tried to back off, but she bulldozed ahead with unstoppable urgency and pure, fierce energy. As she scrubbed his back, Ray finally let his guard down, soaking in the fact that she was doing it with real care, no complaints, just effort. A quick, careful look flickered between them, then her voice sharpened into something serious. She demanded what he knew about the werewolves, and he replied instantly, calm as he sized up how dangerous they really were. Even with all that confidence, he insisted werewolves were lightning fast, wildly dangerous, and could call in backup the moment they caught wind. He finally confirmed it. Those werewolves weren't some rumor. They really did belong in Demonland, way past the reach of any normal human border. They re-explained how the demon realm's barriers worked, and slammed the door shut so werewolves couldn't cross into human lands. Leona panicked the moment she realized it. Something slipped past her barriers, and a forbidden passage got used without her knowing. Ray says this land is home to two kinds of demons, native horrors, and then there are the dungeon-born outsiders like werewolves. Together, they agreed on it. Some kind of dungeon breach had struck, and a secret link was stitching both worlds together. An elite adventurer crew once stumbled onto that path, but the dungeon's true name stayed locked away, hidden from everyone. Ray figured the undead terror must have slipped through the hidden dungeon route to get here. As he blurted out his thanks, he spun around, only to realize Anna had slipped right up behind him without a sound. Caught completely off guard, she leaned in way too close, and the second she did, his face went rigid with raw panic. Before he could stop her, she dove in with "I'll wash more," and the awkward tension shot through the roof in seconds. Right when their moment started to feel perfect, Village Chief Akiusa barreled in with urgent news and snapped it all away. Chief Oki didn't mince words. This village was under a direct threat, and prowling werewolves were already closing in. By then, half the defenders were already gone, the food ran out, and the villagers were trapped so tight they couldn't slip away safely. Even with the Divine Gate buying them a little time, they'd soon realize one hard truth: without outside help, surviving wouldn't last. Rave leaned in, listening hard as the chief bowed low and asked, almost reverently, if they'd carry his message straight to the capital. Without a second thought, he agreed to spill everything to the knights, and swore he'd call for reinforcements right away. A fresh warning flashed through magic. No panic, just a message meant to guide and warn they. Atra, the divine treekeeper, sent a message straight to Ray. No middlemen, just a direct hit addressed to him. Atra didn't feel a single threat nearby, so he urged everyone to bail tonight while the bathroom barrier stays clear. Chief Oki stared in shock as he confirmed the strange night when several male villagers mysteriously disappeared. No one knew why, but staying here as a man put his life on a knife's edge. Lyanna demanded an answer, fear shaking her voice, and Ray froze for a split second, racing through their few remaining options. He stared down every risk: 3 werewolves, the disappearances, the timing, and then snapped into action because sitting still was not an option. Even though she was wiped out, she nodded right away. Her loyalty didn't budge for a second, and she stood ready to follow him without hesitation. Right before he left, the village kids popped up out of nowhere. Their faces crumpled as they begged him not to go without saying goodbye. Ray swore he'd come back one day, and both kids lit up with wide smiles, clinging to that bright dream of a reunion with total trust. Ray shot the village chief a respectful reply, and Lyanna soothed the kids with a calm, steady warmth. Right before he left, Ray stopped dead in his tracks and fired off one last question, his voice steady, serious, and locked on a goal. They hurried to the village's edge, and there, waiting in total silence, someone was already there. Atra shot off an apology for the sudden dash, then spilled the real reason they fled the village at midnight: pure, breathless urgency. Leaving right now was dangerous, but if they stalled, they'd get trapped in there forever, so they clutched at one last chance. They pressed Atra on how sure he was, but he stayed cool and flat out confirmed, "There's no sign of any werewolves nearby, at least not right now." Using aura detection, he sensed the danger had slipped away, just long enough to burst out of there. Even though midnight travel was already dangerous, moving now would shove them out past enemy territory within the hour. Right before they split, Atra warned them to alert the knights. Ray nodded back with iron determination and rushed urgency. With the destination locked in and the guidance in hand, they strode straight for the gate, and the hidden village vanished behind them. Tucked between the trees, a shadowy figure stayed perfectly still, watching the pair move through the village like it was hunting them. Under the blazing full moon, a pack of werewolves spotted their opening and roared that the Guardian's time had finally come to leave. With cruel delight, they planned torture, craving screams and terror more than just tearing into their prey. Even with doubts swirling, they still followed Ulfric's order, brushing aside the travelers and letting them slip through. Craving the woman's raw power, the werewolf even slipped the rules and suggested they eat both. From the shadows, a hidden watcher tracked Ray and Lyanna as they slipped through moonlit paths. Once their departure was locked in, the werewolves spilled out under the blazing full moon, itching to start the hunt. Blunt, bloodthirsty plans snapped into motion, suffering first, devouring after, but that strange man's real strength kept casting doubts into the air. Even with Ulfric's hesitation hanging in the air, his order snapped into place, and the pack, gritting their teeth, finally agreed to back off and leave the travelers in peace. Temptation flared again, her magical aura reeled them in, restraint snapped, bloodlust roared louder than caution, and that choice turned before anyone could stop it. Frozen in terror, Atra lay broken while a towering werewolf loomed over her beneath the cold moonlight. Atra's body just crumpled and went still, and the villagers watching exploded into gasps of shock and pure disbelief. Claws shot up as the beast surged forward, and terrified villagers shrieked and scattered in every direction. Even when the screams tore through the air, no one could break free, because the pack had already smashed past the village perimeter. Cornered beside the altar, a lone woman stood her ground while the werewolf cut off the only way out. She snaps into action, hurling the werewolf through the air before it can even finish its threat. Up on the roof, the werewolf roars the real plan, snatching everyone and stuffing them inside a living cave. Several werewolves burst forward and pounce, boxing in the defenseless humans with nowhere to run, no way out. A fearless woman lunges in with a knife. Then the werewolf's raw, brutal power rips it out of her hands and leaves her disarmed. She stumbles back as the predator taunts her, promising screams and spilling children's blood. Spotting the kids crouched nearby, she snapped into panic and screamed for them to run right now. A sudden blow sliced straight through the werewolf's body. He threw back a brutal roar, stunned speechless as he couldn't even wrap his head around how that knife was there. A hooded warrior tore down from above, and those fierce, icy eyes pinned the beast straight on as it snarled. Right on the razor's edge, the silver-haired warrior tore the werewolf's threat to pieces, leaving both sides stunned, friends and foes alike. Cold eyes stared straight ahead, then he declared it. Punishment was coming for the beast after what it did. Without a second thought, the werewolf shot forward snarling, claws blazing across the air, only to find his strike meant nothing. With a flawless sidestep, he snapped into a counter-strike, and the beast staggered, its whole body twisting in pain from the hit. Before he could even react, a razor-fast assault tore his arm off. His own overwhelming strength couldn't stand up to the killer's precise speed. Rhea unleashed a brutal strike that tore right through the monstrous werewolf's defense with explosive, unstoppable force. Dust and debris blasted through the room as each strike smashed the floorboards and sent bodies flying backward like they weighed nothing. Smoke finally thinned, and there stood Ray, steady, calm, and totally unshaken, like the chaos around him didn't even matter. With eyes locked on the target, Ray lunged forward, ready to crush every last threat without a second thought. Clutching his chest, the wounded werewolf gasped in pain, and pure confusion crashed over him as he raised his power, defying every shred of logic anyone knew. Blood gushed from his side as the werewolf shook in terror. Ray's final strike landed before he even had a chance to react. Ray's piercing stare locked onto his opponent, and anyone who dared hold eye contact longer was walking straight into certain death. When he clocked that surviving wasn't in the cards, the werewolf snapped into action, becoming a flea, racing for the gate and ready to report everything. Moments later, yet another beast stumbled on the captain's body, sprawled lifeless under the moonlight. Too late to save him. Shaken to the bone, the second werewolf went rigid on the spot, while dread flooded Ray's power, far beyond anything anyone expected. A sharp blast shattered the quiet. Alert. The werewolf snapped its head around, ears twitching with alarm. A black mist slithered over the ground as Ray finally rose from it, dragging his prize behind him with relentless, deliberate force. Shock hit the enemy in an instant. Ray was already right there, with his hand tucked behind his back. He dropped the corpse like it weighed nothing, calm as death. Then Ray finally spilled the truth. It was his fallen comrade, a werewolf. Before anyone could even blink, Ray burst in like a bullet, driving a deadly strike straight for his neck. A sharp sound shattered the silence, and the werewolf snapped his head around, ears twitching like they'd heard danger. A black mist slithered over the ground as Ray finally pushed himself up, hauling whatever was behind him with cold, deliberate force. Shock hit them instantly. Ray was already right there, and the enemy realized, just as the hand stayed hidden behind his back. Ray dumped the dead body without a flinch, then calmly laid bare the truth. Turns out the werewolf's fallen comrade was dead for good. Ray burst in like lightning, not even letting him breathe, and drove a deadly strike straight for his neck. Ray snapped his head toward the voice. Then a familiar figure strode out from the villages. The village chief crept closer, worry written all over his face, and Ray asked him, had anyone gotten hurt during the attack? Ray didn't even get to answer. Chief immediately fired back, demanding how he somehow knew about the werewolf ambush before it hit. Ray narrowed his eyes and jerked a hand toward the gate, accusing the divine gatekeeper of faking death just to dodge suspicion. While the crowd held its breath, the gatekeeper stood up and confirmed Ray's gut feeling. He was the collaborator. Atra stormed in front of everyone, and Ray's eyes went wide, because he realized the truth way too late. The villagers stumbled back in pure shock. Betrayal sliced straight through their hearts, because Atra had fooled everyone who'd trusted him without question. The village chief ripped the truth out of the shadows, sealing Atra's plan, so the werewolves could march in through the gate. 8 proof snapped into place, the timing lined up perfectly, and even Ray got hit with shocked stares from his own allies. Scent alone cracked the truth wide open, and Ray felt the werewolf creeping over Atra before exposing how everything was connected. Evidence piled up against Atra, his key to the gate, a surge of stolen divine power, and even a suspicious werewolf lurking in the shadows. Without even trying to deny it, Atra snapped into a defensive mode, mocked Ray's deduction, and shoved the suspicion right back onto him. Trapped with no escape left, Atra's mask snapped, and as it shattered, he swore he'd kill everyone without the slightest hesitation. Ray held his composure and fired off one question. Why would Atra side with monsters like werewolves? Desperation shattered his voice as Atra's ripped the truth. He joined their side just to keep breathing, not because he had any other choice. Ray watched the man's eyes twitch and shift, and suspicion surged. She knew he was hiding something deadly. Atra confessed he'd traded lives for safety, and as the villagers froze in stunned silence, his betrayal finally spilled out. Consumed by the need for power and freedom, he decided to kill Ray and leave the village behind with zero remorse. But instead of flying off the handle, Ray pressed Atra, demanding to know her real purpose and why she'd ever choose the life of a knight. Becoming a holy knight meant betting your life on divine integration, because it didn't come with comfort, it came with a survival trial. Ira leans in, eyes sharp, as his opponent insists survival only belongs to loyalty. or to cutthroat, greedy ambition. Accusations hit harder as emotions flare, and suddenly the past comes crashing in, revealing truths buried under years of trauma. As Atra spills his past, he finally admits the truth. His power was forged to protect the people he once held close. Chasing after him, the youth begs for mercy, pleading for vengeance to stop and for the slaughter that means nothing to end. Atra explodes in rage, no peace, no compromise, slamming fate and everyone else as he grieves a loss he calls helpless and tragic. Memories of his family kept slamming into him, screaming that nothing on earth could ever bring them back again. Rage devoured his mind and he blamed everyone with a vicious heart, then swore he'd slaughter every single innocent soul. Realizing there was no escape left, he yanked his weapon back into place and braced himself to take Atra head-on. Two warriors surged forward at once, their weapons smashing together as rage and sorrow crashed through the air, thick with desperate words they never dared to say. As steel collided, Atra's mind slipped back to the woman he once swore he'd protect. He gripped the coffin with shaking hands, swallowed by crushing grief, because his family, his reason to live, was gone for good. Grief and rage swallowed him whole, and he swore he'd wipe out every last soul, villagers, countrymen, anyone still left breathing. Ray realized Atra's madness couldn't be talked down, so he clenched harder, steel in his spine, ready for whatever came next. Under the moon's cold glow, both warriors surged forward with blades bared, their hearts crashing together in a tragic clash of ideals. When the blades finally collided, Atra's memories snapped back, her gentle voice, her warmth, the love she once shared as his wife. Living apart from his family, he ached to be there, right in the thick of it, to watch his children grow up with his own eyes. Years slipped by in steady, silent duty, and with every single day he survived, doubts about his purpose crushed heavier and heavier. Disaster slammed out of nowhere. Monsters tore through the town where his beloved family had been living in peace. Not a single one made it, only a few elite knights and the residents who got counted among the survivors were left standing. Later, he finally ripped the curtain off the mission's truth. Turns out it was just a fake battlefield built to train the holy knights. Survivors from the failed mission bragged away, not realizing, while a grieving villager stayed quiet and listened in the middle of them. Their laughter rang out without a shred of shame. Life meant more than honor, and Atra swallowed it. But behind that silence, fists tightened like a promise. He trained like his life depended on it to keep his family safe, and even after surviving death again and again, he still watched everything slip away. When the pressure hit, my heart shattered. Betrayal twisted everything into sorrow and raw fury, and somehow it all hardened into a resolve colder than steel. Still, when the werewolf struck, he froze in place. No help, no mercy. Then justice finally showed up anyway, unspoken, ruthless, and right on the money. He tracked down the last holy knights himself, then executed them on the spot. No hesitation, no a single flicker of remorse. The werewolves zeroed in on his move, baffled. How could he slaughter comrades who'd once been his friends? Cold eyes ripped the truth wide open. Those knights had sold them out, betraying everything, and to him they weren't friends at all, they were the enemy. Under the moonlit sky, Ulfurk, the werewolf king's powerful familiar, showed up like a force of nature and brought Atra forth with one chilling summon. Their goals collided into pure chaos, vengeance, ruin, all of it, and Atra grabbed Alfurix's hand, whispering the plan to burn the village to the ground. When the villagers weren't looking, he slipped through and quietly swung the gate open, giving the werewolves free rein to snatch victims. No fight, no chance. Believing he could break the divine tree's curse for good, he decided wiping out the village was the only path to true freedom. Guilt slammed into him every time a new vow crumbled, but nothing, no regret, no fear, could make him stop. Alfred's voice kept bouncing around in his skull, twisting every thought until even the "for a reason" part started to break apart. If he slaughtered everyone, what was freedom even worth? What soul would be left standing after the blood stopped? Tears blasted down Atra's face as he crumpled to the ground, screaming for answers for his brutal, blood-soaked trail. No answer could fix a thing. His family was already gone, and nothing, not even a miracle, could bring back what was lost. Ray faced Atra head-on, fury roaring through her, because justice demanded a brutal showdown. No mercy for an unforgivable crime. Sprint after the kids outside, afraid the moment they crossed the village's magical barrier, danger could come crashing in. Atra burst back onto the scene with ruthless intent, and steel screamed as her blades collided, turning the battlefield into instant chaos. Ray surged forward in a blur, snapping his blade up to meet Atra's ferocious swing with razor-perfect precision. Atra snapped in a vicious counter and slammed into Ray's side, but Ray clamped down on his opponent's cloak before Atra could pull away. Atra spun low again and then struck back with a violent blast, hurling him backward before he could even catch his breath. Shock hit both fighters dead in their tracks when Ray's sudden strike tore through Atra's defense in one savage move. Atra slammed into the ground and Ray kept surging forward, refusing to slow even as dust and debris exploded around him. Remembering Atra's sheer monster strength, Ray realized this man's magic and technique could match the same legacy everyone once revered. Even after losing, he burst out laughing, because Ray's real power crushed every warrior he'd ever faced. Even as an Atra-ranked diamond, she admitted Ray's power could smash the limits of a ruby class, and might be something that didn't even fit the categories at all. Ray realized Atra's divine strength wasn't random at all. It was powered by love, burning into obsession as she clung to the need to protect her family. Before Ray could move, Atra lunged in his face, sensing the hesitation, and demanded a knockout before he even had time to think. Screaming for death, Atra threw his life forward, sure that if he died, the madness wrecking his soul would finally stop. Still refusing to surrender, Atra summoned a fiery spirit and unleashed its wrath to burn everything around her to nothing. Blazing power exploded outward, and he swore the village would be wiped out unless Ray faced him with full seriousness. A blinding explosion tore through the air, and soldiers, villagers, and Ray's allies could only stare, helpless, as Ray got swallowed whole by the blast. He burst through it unscathed, moving with unstoppable calm, and Atra's deadliest strike couldn't even leave a scratch on his skin. Ray didn't hesitate, he shoved his palm forward, crushed magic surge into Atra's space, and left her totally blindsided. Ray ripped through the air with a hard burst of focused energy, driving it into Atra with the clear goal of crushing him, without killing him. Even with brutal injuries Atra snapped at Ray, was that mercy or something colder? Ray could have ended it, but he refused to finish Outro off. Confused by Atra's move, Ray pressed him for the real reason he teamed up with the werewolves. Still drowning in grief and confusion, Atra kept begging for death again and again, until his words finally turned into a desperate scream for release. Ray clenched his resolve to break through, swore off violence, and tried one more time to reach Atra's heart. He warned Atra that the memories he held dear would vanish, pushing him to cling to the people he loved instead. Despair swallowed Atra whole. He pushed hope away and demanded his pain and burning emotions be erased. Lyanna got slammed midair, and before anyone could even process it, Ray and Atra snapped into action, shocked by her sudden drop. Two villagers stared in terror as the enemy hauled out their captives, Shu and Liz, stumbling into view while being held down tight. Cornered and out of options, the werewolf snapped, refusing to surrender, then barked at Atra to stall Ray, all while he used the children as leverage. Ray clocked it immediately. This weren't normal healing at all. The werewolf's body twisted in ways that screamed impossible, pushing past every natural limit. When Ray finally clocked the villain's escape plan, panic slammed into him. He drifted too far off the Divine Gate's path. Atra's eyes went huge with shock. Ray's roar hit, and he froze, begging him to remember what actually mattered. Ray demanded answers from Atra, furious that the face he once wore to entertain innocent kids was gone without a trace. Shu, Liz, and the others came back in a rush, smiling. Memories that used to feel precious just started flooding Atra's mind. As her voice rang out in the quiet, Atra remembered the real truth. His purpose was to shield those kids, not tear the world apart. With clenched teeth, Atra reignited his will and pushed past the rage. Because it wasn't revenge he wanted, it was the village's smiles worth protecting. Charging ahead, Atra slammed his resolve into place. Protecting the village mattered more than any pain he could feel. Everyone gasped. Right on cue, the Divine Gate answered, and Atra's spear triggered the sealing mechanism up in the heavens. The werewolf panicked as Atra's surprise strike slammed the system, triggering the gate's shutdown and sealing every escape route. Light twisted violently as the gate's power roared outward, like the world could feel the final closure starting. As chaos erupted, Ray burst in, yanking Shu and Liz to safety while she shielded them from the battlefield crashing down behind her. In the werewolf's eye, the Divine Gate's light flared, his defeat already locked in, creeping closer by the second. Atra lunged forward with razor focus, and his spear drove straight through the enemy's stand, freezing the monster in its tracks. Magic detonated on impact. Atra's strike smashed the werewolf in a single blow and wiped out the chaos instantly. As the dust finally cleared, Atra stood like a wall that wouldn't move, while survivors and allies behind him stared in stunned, relieved silence. Shu and Liz sprinted to her crying, and when Atra wrapped them in a tight embrace, emotion hit hard as she was moved by their warmth. Ray stood there totally frozen, his heart swelling with gratitude, because nobody had ever truly seen and praised what he did before. After he quietly confessed his mistake, regret hit him hard for every dangerous risk he'd shoved into their lives inside the dungeon's chaos. When Ray triggered the Divine Gate, Shukan and Lizchan were yanked back from death. He stared down, torn in two, responsibility hanging heavy on his shoulders, yet deep in his chest, something inside him had finally flipped. Ray clenched his fist, and for the first time, pure conviction drowned out every doubt. He'd finally made his choice. The faces of that woman and her two kids slammed into Ray's mind, and suddenly he remembered exactly why he fought in the first place. Survivors clustered behind him, and every single life they kept in the end was proof of his courage, his stubborn determination, and that unbreakable will that wouldn't quit. Ray shot his hand toward Atra, grabbed the victory, and swore to respect every damn cost it took. Animal remains litter the path, and it's a brutal sign that something unnatural just tore the local balance apart. Their steps sped up with raw urgency, because the hostile creatures they'd pinpointed were probably closing in right then. With the loss staring him in the face, Atra swallowed his pride, admitted defeat, and recognized the raw strength standing right in front of him. Ray snapped his attention to his ally, and in that steady stare you could feel all the things he hadn't said, heavy, pressing, and ready to explode. Mutual understanding blossomed between them, no resentment, just pure respect for the journey and the truth they uncovered. Shu and Liz grinned and nodded along, totally oblivious to the crushing weight Atra was about to have to carry. The monster's march toward the village was a death clock. Holy nights were coming fast, and there wasn't much time left. Atra knew that if she was captured, she'd be thrown into a high-security prison, sealed deep inside by the king's fiercest enforcers. Legends swore the prison was sealed by magic so unbreakable that even demons couldn't smash its cursed defenses. From the forbidden dark abyss, not a single soul ever came back, and once it closed in, every fate was locked in for good. Legends named it the Cradle of Sin, where the Vigrador clan's barriers shut away the darkness. A sudden flashback slammed into him, and long familiar faces from his past resurfaced, so fast they froze his thoughts in place. Regret surfaced that if they'd only arrived earlier, this whole tragedy might have been stopped before it ever began. Stressing over every misfortune got him nowhere, so he had to speak now before he walked away for good. Good fear finally vanished, and Ray swore on everything that mattered he'd use his power to protect it with his life. The villagers huddled in stunned silence, and every move they made came with a price. Atra just knew that's exactly what they'd do. Right before she left, Atra shoved Ray into the mission, protect the village, and swear the holy night wasn't what it looked like. Atra panicked and demanded that his death be blamed on the werewolves, anything but those terrified townspeople who would surely be blamed next. Even as a divine gatekeeper, he swallowed his fate years ago, no regrets, not a single one. The village elder was crushed with regret, wishing he'd backed Atra long before guilt swallowed him whole. Convinced he was truly unforgivable, Atra swallowed his pride and took the blame, ready to pay with his own life if that's what it took. The villagers held their ground through the pain, clenching their restraint like a vow, shutting down revenge and refusing execution as justice. Shanoka stepped into view and everyone froze. Hesitation flickered across her face, but under it, a deeper, unresolved ache kept burning in her eyes. Even when she couldn't forgive, she admitted the truth. Her hatred wasn't born from reason, it was forged by loss and pure helplessness. Even with grief crushing her, she still admitted the truth. His relentless protection of the village and the children he saved were facts she couldn't deny. Hit with a wave of gratitude, Atra froze in total silence, realizing every sacrifice he made wasn't for nothing. Tears burned as it hit him. Somehow he was still loved by so many, and he'd completely forgotten that. Villagers swarmed around Atra's collapsed body, and the hatred they carried finally broke. Sorrow took over, turning into quiet mourning and silent respect. Even Shu and Liz went wide-eyed. Without the divine treekeeper here, the whole world suddenly felt empty and wrong. Even with pain still biting at their hearts, Ray and Lena turned their grief into steel, then pushed forward with purpose. With Atra gone, the chaos finally died down, and Ray checked on Liana, safe and sound, while hope started creeping back in, one breath at a time. Gratitude crackled through the air as the village chief clasped Lyanna's hands, so moved by her selfless evacuation that he couldn't even find words. Even with guilt crushing her, Lyanna still blurted out her regret, then rage and anguish simmered, while a gentler voice quietly reassured her with kindness and comfort. He flashed a smile, proudly backing her courage, and you could feel it. Her hard work mattered, his words struck right home in her heart. Suddenly, everything lurched, then that ominous force slammed in again, and it hit them before they could even react. Captain Therese from the King's Blue Dragon Division stormed in so confidently that everyone's eyes snapped to him, and respect followed right on the heels. As she scanned the chaos, Therese finally caught sight of Atra, and she couldn't believe he'd made it out alive while werewolves tore everything apart. Without even thinking, Therese demanded a full report. Atra, steady yet worn down, nodded and swore to tell the whole truth. After she listened, Therese finally pieced it all together, and the village's truth hit her way harder than she ever expected. Huddled around the table, they tore into the kingdom's unrest, crushed by suffering citizens and held together by a political balance so thin it could snap. Captain Therese paused, torn between duty and what she felt, but she knew one thing for sure: her resolve would not bend, not now, not ever. Even with regret and crushing sorrow weighing him down, Atra swallowed his doubts and accepted the judgment, ready to take whatever punishment came for his past, righteous but reckless choices. Therese shut down the execution order and demanded imprisonment instead, declaring that the divine power holders would stay alive because their responsibility wasn't over yet. Even though nobody knew why, the divine users somehow dodged death because hidden laws rewrote their fate. Ray calmly laid out his side and then confirmed it. Atra fought like a beast and wiped out all 3 attacking werewolves by herself. Rai stood in silence, and the power he unleashed in battle left even the biggest doubters staring at a white mage like, wait, that's him. A fearless warrior stepped in, locking eyes with Ray, and instantly knew she was the legendary white mage from the elite Takana Dongwa. Still, he couldn't figure out why he'd become famous, so he hesitated hard. Then the knight finally slipped into a calm, formal introduction. Therese, a ruby-ranked knight, flashed back on missions where Ray had tangled with top-tier adventure parties. Shock hit him hard. Gunkanadingwa had just climbed to S-Rank, and that's why the knight suddenly recognized his name. He finally muttered that he'd split from Gunkanadingwa, totally clueless about what happened after. A surprise dungeon run detonated into pure nightmare. An S-Rank monster crushed the party, leaving most of them on the edge of death. Loki's face and the sight of all his fallen comrades crashed into Ray's mind, and their wounds hit harder than he ever expected. Even after severing every emotional tie, the memories and the guilt of his banishment crashed back in, uninvited. Even after Ray told himself he was over it, those messy feelings still clawed their way up from his chest. The knight couldn't wrap his head around it. How could someone as deadly capable as Ray tear herself away from Gunkanadingwa and head off alone? He admitted it himself. He wasn't talented at all. He had to claw his way through magic on his own, and they still kicked him out for being seen as nothing but useless. Disbelief swallowed his face as he snapped that the choice was foolish and way too low to deserve the price he thought it was worth. Without a single pause, he shoved a spot in the Blue Dragon Division into Ray's hands, and everyone standing there instantly went wide-eyed in shock. The others stared in stunned silence, and that silence forced the knight to admit his reckless scouting needed far better judgment. The King's Knights ruled with absolute power, but Captain Therese still stood out, shockingly humble in a world full of ego. He got paid with a fresh reward of 300 gold coins after tearing down a terrifying werewolf. He didn't take the money, he demanded it be used to rebuild the shattered villa. Stunned by Ray's selfless sacrifice, Therese burst into laughter and decided she wanted him in her ranks for real, like right now. Now the knight had 2 missions burning in his chest: rebuild the village and lock the divine gate back into stable form. Captain Therese praised Ray for ending that draw without a single fight, and the villagers and knights all lit up with gratitude. Even if it was small, that reward hit like a giant thank you, handing the village's safety right back to Therese's capable care. With resolve, Therese snapped the knights into reconstruction mode, then turned to interrogate Atra about the demons. They begged Ray to stay on as captain, convinced he needed to hear the demons' truth firsthand. Everyone froze when they realized Atra had been twisted by Ulfurk, one of the 4 deadly demons. The 4 knights of the demon realm are backed by Sss-Ranked monsters, and they answer to the demon lord without question. Atra spilled the truth: I can feel the familiar here, and it's wrecking me. as if some brutal demonic power was about to twist his mind. Out of nowhere, Ray realized that same demonic force wasn't just around. It had zeroed in on him, and he was the target. The demon chose to spare Ray, snapping at the fear that he'd come crashing into their plan to wipe out the whole village. Grateful the truth finally clicked, Ray looked at the signs, and everything he'd always felt, the eyes on him, made perfect sense. Ray's instinct screamed the truth. Alpha, a deadly demon, didn't just cross his path, she hunted him on purpose. Elsewhere in the manor, shouts ripped through the halls as everyone burst the news. Lady Hymno had finally fought back and opened her eyes again. Panic swallowed him as she screamed in terror, begging for light, clutching her bandaged arm like it was her lifeline. Even though it was morning, she sobbed over the darkness, totally clueless that everything had just shifted. Even in the bright room, her maid blurted the truth, and the injury had already stolen Himeno's sight. Hymno crumpled into pure despair the moment she faced the truth. Both her eyes were gone forever. Darkness crashed over her senses as she shrieked for help, refusing to accept that she'd been shattered beyond repair. Barely hanging on, she rasped out Ray's name, whispering please like a lifeline, begging someone to pull her out of despair. The carriage rumbled on as Lena's eyes lit up, and there, straight ahead, their long-awaited destination finally rose on the horizon. Ray narrowed his eyes, feeling something off, like a familiar presence was stirring just beyond the far walls. The capital shone behind its protective barrier, and as the towering gates yawned wide, it welcomed them back like they'd never been gone. Miliana waved them through on the spot, barking their access code through the eastern gate and straight into the Blue Dragon district. Even with the rules getting steamrolled, Miliana still admitted she was guilty, something only the most pressured knights ever got to do. Atra called out Captain Therese's stubborn streak and teased that he couldn't help but take an interest in Ray and Lyanna. At the capital's gate, they traded a little gratitude for shared travel, and then the registration threw them a couple of unexpected allies. The day before, Ray and Leona tore away after sharing a tearful goodbye with Shinoka and her whole crew. Out on the road, Captain Therese suddenly showed up out of nowhere and offered them a ride right after he wrapped up his mission. Because of his invitation, they tore across the distance with zero trouble, and at last, right on cue, they slammed into the walls of the capital. Captain Therese tried to jump in with more help, but Ray turned her down with a polite smile. He had to bolt to headquarters right now. Ray thanked him from the bottom of his heart, then spun toward the city gates with Leona right on his heels. The whole capital thrummed with life, crowds surged everywhere, shops blared, and strange creatures prowled every street and alleyway. Right as Ray pushed into the crowd, a comforting warmth hit him like a wave, swallowing him whole with the capital's electric atmosphere. 5 years felt like an eternity, and there was no way he'd ever imagined he'd claw his way back after sealing himself deep in Yggdrasil. Ray spotted Liana loitering by the city's information board, marched up to her, and felt her hesitation thicken the air. As she looked back on her old visits, she finally confessed, during training, she never once got to roam the capital freely. Massive buildings shot up around them, and Liana just stood there, staring. She couldn't believe how huge everything looked, like the world had expanded overnight. He proposed they go sightseeing together, but she shut it down fast, saying her presence would throw a wrench in his plans. Fingers clenched with sheer nerves, she blurted out her worry, then Ray hesitated, scared that staying close would only weigh her down more. To make sure Lena felt part of everything, Ray handed her the bags and brought her along on every errand. Before they go any further, he leaned in and reminded her of the promise they once made under the stars. Their long-forgotten vow to gorge on sweets together in the capital's open streets came out of nowhere, and it left them quietly stunned. Burning with that memory, Liana's face lit up, and she couldn't wait to keep the promise they'd made. They hit the shop side by side. Ray took charge at the counter, Liana trailed behind, and with every step she started to loosen up, sinking to the flow. Crowds streamed by as Ray and Lena pushed deeper into the maze, boxed in by crowded shops and looming mechanical structures. Inside the store, she froze with wide eyes, drawn to rare crystals and strange artifacts blazing under the glowing lights. After digging through the place, Ray shoved open the door and strode into a clothing shop, stepping onto the platform as Liana wandered around, searching. While he fumbled into the new outfit he'd begged for, he went to pin it on her, and her praise hit him like a punch, catching him completely off guard. Blushing hard, she watched Ray finish the purchase and then slip the thing on right there. After his turn ended, Ray leaned in and told Liana it was her moment to gear up. With the brand new outfit on, she froze in shock, gripping the sword like it might burn her, wondering if she honestly deserved it. Ray spoke softly but firmly. Her sword was busted, and she needed gear built for how fast she was growing. Ray's sincerity hit her hard, and suddenly she remembered that crushing helpless feeling, trapped while the crisis raged and she couldn't help. Tears burned in her eyes, guilt from the village still clung to her, and she crushed herself with blame for Liz's injury. During the werewolf attack, Lyanna's fear spilled out. Then, when death finally showed up, everything she'd trained for just vanished. Ray finally admitted it. She didn't just brush it off, because even the toughest fighters tremble the first time real danger turns their world upside down. With a steady calm, he wiped away her tears and knew, right down to his bones, how hard she'd been fighting her own doubts. Her sword, stamped with the village symbol, screamed regret. She crumpled in shame, sobbing at how helpless and frozen she'd been. He spotted grit burning through the pain. No matter what she said, her eyes kept shining with kindness and unbreakable strength. Ray clenched his resolve and swore this time he'd do the teaching himself. He'd show her, hands-on, how to fight for real. As he traveled with her, he kicked off her training. Then her attack technique lit up with way more promise than she ever imagined. Even with her progress, dread surged in her gut. She flinched, stumbled mid-motion, and her rhythm instantly fell apart. Fear still clung to her, so she slowed to a crawl, no eye contact, fingers trembling, as she misread the enemy's moves even in the middle of the bath. If she dared to stare that fear down, her strength would surge. No doubt, no faking it. Ray watched her closely, praying that one sweet dessert could smack away the dungeon fatigue still clinging to her. Lyanna's eyes lit up with pure delight as she stared at the sweet parfait and its adorable look, and the moment she tried to apologize, tears spilled over her cheeks. Joy hit her so hard she couldn't remember feeling it for years. As Ray sipped his tea, someone called his name, and he instantly felt the whole room's mood snap into something darker. He leaned in, hanging on every word as she praised his healing, and his mind snapped right back to Liz's injury from that werewolf attack. Ray didn't just cast standard healing, he supercharged the body's own recovery, shredding the limits of normal and kicking regeneration into overdrive. Lyanna realized his magic didn't just heal it, it rewound the damage like he was tearing time in half and stitching everything back together. Ray's silent shock hit hard when he realized Leona could read the aura flow behind his mysterious technique. He leaned in to lay out the truth, but she cut him off, bursting first, desperate to tell him her idea. In the ruins, she warned him, his power didn't heal people at all. It unleashed something way more terrifying. She snapped at Ray to bury his power, terrified that both nations, and the demons too, would hunt him down. Ray's stomach dropped at her words. He froze for a second, then shoved it away with a shaky, forced apology that didn't fool anyone. Ray needed official white major clearance, guild approval, schooling, training, the whole package, and he'd never gotten any of it. Ray taught himself healing from scratch and somehow stumbled into a method no school ever officially acknowledged. As they split up, Liana poured out her thanks, completely oblivious to how her presence had just steadied him. Ray finally confessed his terrible sense of direction, and Lena lit up anyway. She cherished every second they spent together. With the sword held high, she swore she'd grow stronger and fight at his side no matter what. Ray smirked softly, and the words she spoke hit like a bolt, way deeper than she could even grasp in that single, dizzy moment. He softly ruffled her hair, and you could feel the relief hit, because her honesty was real, and the resolve she swore she'd build was exactly what he needed. Suddenly, the calm got shattered by a thunderous step, and a voice. Instant tension snapped back like a spring. A stranger stepped up, eyes locked on Ray's hair, and the moment he recognized it, his voice turned cold and unsettling. The armored man didn't hesitate. He barked for confirmation, and Ray froze, hit by the name and the urgency like deja vu, because when Suglist was spoken, everything he'd buried started clawing its way back to the surface. The group froze in place as that name snapped back into the room, ripping open memories they'd buried and sworn to never touch. Ray snapped into eye contact with that man, his presence so untouchable it felt like death itself had backed off, and it instantly lit a storm of questions inside Ray. Years ago, their team, Gonkanadangwa, stormed into the infamous Yggdrasil labyrinth, daring fate and chasing glory inside its cursed depths. Monsters crushed in from every direction, trapping them deep underground. Escaping felt impossible unless they grabbed a rare teleport stone, so they fought to stretch their last resources as far as they could. In that split second, greed swallowed loyalty whole, and they ditched Ray to die without a single hesitation. Ray's exile wasn't some accident. It was a cold, calculated betrayal disguised as strategy. They cackled as they planned, acting loyal to his face while behind the scenes they lined up a way to toss him aside, calling it necessity. To them, he wasn't a hero at all, just a frail burden, a white mage they swore couldn't fight or earn a single drop of glory. Now Ray stood tall again after pulling off the impossible, coming back stronger than anyone could understand, back on his feet to predict what comes next. News of his arrival shot through the crowd fast. Everyone recognized him on sight, but the power radiating from him was so overwhelming that nobody dared challenge it. If the secret slips out, everything goes up in flames. Loki and Himano would be crushed the second Ray tells the cold, undeniable truth. Gonkanadongwa's leadership starts cracking from the inside, his mind trapped in internal fights as he fears another scandal will smash the fragile status and influence they've barely kept standing. Ringed by curious onlookers, Ray stays ice calm while Saugons quietly plots to shut him up before the truth can explode. Nervous politeness cracked into a smile and he glanced aside just to bait the next step, while panic fought to surface and deadly intent waited in silence. Even with a calm face, Ray can feel trouble closing in for Saugons, because this was never how his return was supposed to go. Even in public, Saugons might blow his temper out of control, and while that storm raged, Ray kept his cool and quietly read the whole situation. Captain Teresa's report confirmed it. Every single Gonkanadonga member came back from their latest botched mission battered and injured. Out of everyone, Suglin took barely any hits, so people started side-eyeing him. Then a nearby girl stepped in and demanded to know what connection Ray had to Suglin. Calling so glints his usual acquaintance greeting and Ray downplays the pass, yet his quiet apology gives away the storm of feelings he's been forcing back. Soon enough, the cries cut through the air, reinforcements surged in fast, and just like that, the tension snapped, because backing out of the showdown was getting harder by the second. Crumbling buildings closed in around them, once a training ground, now picked for pure violence. Glenn took one look at the battered wood and twisted metal wreckage and called the spot convenient, but Ray knew this wasn't some random luck. When the truth snapped into place, Ray realized Glentz hadn't changed a bit. This whole setup was just a trap, and the only goal was murder. Trash hauled from the capital always met its end here, blasted into flames, scrubbed from the record, and swallowed by ash, perfect cover to bury crimes under rubble and heat. Behind that grin, fear brewed, so Glent couldn't risk getting exposed for ditching Ray in the Yggdrasil dungeon's depths. Those brutal memories came crashing back. He wasn't disciplined at all, just beaten again and again so they could dump their daily rage on him. The Hainsoglin's praise was really a sneer in disguise, and to him, it only meant one thing: Ray's survival was proof he'd finally become just barely useful. Ray threw out a deal, silence in exchange for peace, swearing off revenge and only asking to be left alone. Even with the calm tone, Soglin's arrogance finally cracked. Ray's confident presence rattled him far more than he'd ever expected. Before things spiraled out of control, Liana stepped in, voice shaking and eyes blazing wide as she desperately tried to stop Ray from going any farther. Lena's voice trembled, but she didn't back down. Glentz's rage detonated the moment she dared to defy him. Ray didn't hesitate. He slammed into him and dropped him hard, eyes locked on his target, because this time he wasn't holding back. Glenn's threat loomed like a storm cloud, but Ray dug in his heels and refused to buy into any fantasy of forgiveness or weakness. Ray stepped forward with zero hesitation and made it crystal clear today was the end. No more interruptions, no more games. Mocking laughter rained down and Soglin's scrim snapped tight with terror, because Ray had stopped fearing death and hymns alike. Glenn hurled the recklessly slung charge while yelling threats, but Ray struck like lightning and crushed it before pain could even blink. Rage thundered through Soglenst as he refused to stop his brutal assault, but Ray's counter landed clean and shattered him. Crumbling rubble ringed his feet and Ray strode on with nerves of steel, asking straight up whether anything had finally landed on Soglin's pride. A smug voice cut in again, and when I glanced over, he looked wounded, but still arrogant, swearing that next time he'd finally stop holding back and fight for real. Muscles bulged and magic erupted, his killing intent screaming higher as he finally unleashed his full power, gunning to obliterate everything. So Glenst snapped into his ultimate technique, Kaj tearing forward with brutal speed and locking onto his opponent from every direction. Momentum roared forward, but one crack still sat at the heart of it all. If Renew destroys the weapon, the deadly assault gets wiped out. Right before impact, Soglenst snapped his path midair, his trajectory lurched, and the real target was Ray anymore. Lena froze when it hit her. Glenst had her in his sights the whole time, and as their eyes snapped locked, his blade rose to strike. Terror pinned her in place. Before she could even move, the impact slammed down beside her with a deafening roar. The enemy's brutal strike slammed Leona to the ground, and as rubble exploded around them, Ray was left totally helpless. Ray stumbled through the raining wreckage, heart slamming in his chest, his eyes locked on that armored enemy's looming silhouette. Ray stood amidst shattered stone and felt it hit her. This wasn't just raw power, it was straight-up cruelty. With a smirk full of malice, the knight taunted Ray as he vowed cruel torment for Liana, then ended his own life. Ray whipped his gaze toward him, fury simmering in his eyes, and he wasn't apologizing because he was scared. He was apologizing for waiting this long to finally snap. So Ray spotted the loyal butler, calm as a blade, who warned him that fighting back right now would unleash a never-ending storm of violence. Gossett coldly warned him that mocking Daydane's nobility meant one thing, death, and for a branded slave like Ray, it was already ticking. With a nasty grin, the soldier taunted Ray, saying the woman would get hurt first, then he'd be the one they put down. As Ray rose, black tendrils of mana erupted out of nowhere, and the arrogant butler went rigid, shocked by the crushing pressure. Lightning snapped across the raised ground as he snarled for release, his voice razor-sharp, eyes blazing, no longer begging but demanding submission. Rihanna choked on her own blood and crumpled amid Spanny's shattered rubble, while the knight kept stalking her, begging her to stay alive. The knight grinned like a maniac and shoved them shut alone. Ray stood outside, slammed away by a wall of cursed matches. Fear clenched her heart because if that sudden kick hadn't hit, the sword would have ended her life on the spot. Panic seized her thoughts. If the rock's magic was real, Ray couldn't reach her no matter what she did. With twisted hunger burning in his chest, the knight forced himself to hold back, itching to break her down slowly, piece by piece. Right before he handed out pain, the knight froze in place, smirk curling on his face as he pressed her about how she was tied to Ray. With a firm voice, she declared, "Risama is my precious master," standing her ground even as terror tried to shake her. Mocking shock snapped over his face as he sneered at her, jaw tight, demanding if she really served that so-called trash. With venom on his tongue, he exposed the rays his comrades left behind as pointless. Then he crushed them with zero regret. Then he let out a cold, cruel laugh, replaying how everyone snickered at Ray's failure, and tossed that unwanted white mage aside like she meant nothing. Before unleashing the pain, he paused in the dark, smirked, and grilled her about how she tied herself to rape. Her voice rang out firm and fearless. She swore that Raizama was her precious master, and she stood her ground even as fear clawed at her. Mocking surprise snapped across his face as he sneered at her, taunting her to see if she really served that so-called trash. Spitting venom, he showed them rays ones his comrades had tossed aside, called worthless, and abandoned without a shred of regret. He let out a cruel laugh as he replayed every time they mocked Ray for failing, then tossed that unwanted white mage away like it meant nothing at all. Instead of rage, the knight smirked with twisted glee. Lyanna's spirit had finally hooked his curiosity. He lunged in, itching to shatter her resolve, and fired off a direct challenge, hungry for their deadly game. Determination thundered in her chest as she yanked the sword free, then tore herself loose from the suffocating grip of fear. Steel screamed through the air as he slammed his weapon down with monstrous, ruthless force. Eyes locked on her, he snarled his threat. He'd tear off her arm before he even got started. Water magic erupted like a tidal roar, slamming the attacker backward with a shockwave so brutal it left the air ringing. She didn't lean on spells at all. She slammed into his sword head-on, drowning him in pure, razor-clean technique. Her stamina and aura were running out, so she had to hold back, spending water magic just to keep control, while empowering her body came with a price she couldn't afford. She clutched harder not because she was afraid to let go, but because discipline and trust had been forged in her. Winning meant everything if it came from Raisama's teachings, the power she trusted above all else. With conviction burning in her bones, she roared her vow she would prove Risama's worth with raw, undeniable strength. Blades came slashing back at her again, while the enemy sneered, daring her to quit after that defense she'd barely held off. Ray's training memory crashed back as he once swore that combat has 4 survival rules you can't afford to miss. First, lock onto the opponent's eyes, watch that gaze closely, then read their next move and time your response so every incoming attack hits your perfect counter. Watch their stance and balance like a hawk, because the moment you read it right, you'll see their next move before they even fully unleash it. Raise your hand, then only strike when you're 100% sure your hit will land, no hesitation, no doubt. Her razor-precise strike connected with a deadly thud, slamming the knight backward. Ray's third principle just proved it worked. Still calm, she pulled the third lesson from her memory, flow and timing that decided her momentum in every single fight. Or once mastery finally arrived, she would fuse strength, sharpen her senses, and harness her energy, turning her into a true warrior. With those four principles finally aligned, Ray felt it in her bones. One day, she'd become terrifyingly formidable. Liana whipped through the air at the last second, barely juking the knight's strike as her blade screeched past, rage driving every move. Eyes locked, Ray shot forward and caught the next strike, thrusting his knife up just as that massive hit came crashing in. Pressure cranked higher and higher, his breathing turned sharp and tight, yet the knight's rhythm never broke and he couldn't spot a single opening. With a thunderous roar, the armored brute drove his blade down. Ray snapped backward, throwing himself between it and Liana on pure instinct. Ray and Liana crumpled onto shattered ground, Ray's limbs shaking, Liana gasping, every ounce of strength draining as defeat closed in fast. The knight sneered at Ray's exhaustion, and he could feel the weakness in himself as it pushed in, merciless, relentless. From across the chaos, he taunted them, "Go on, and you'll die," and Lena's trembling voice cracked as she begged for mercy. Laughing at her pleas, the knight ordered her to be humiliated, then made her crawl and lick his boots. With tears trapped behind her hair, Lena clenched her fists and forced herself to repeat that humiliating command. Rage surged through her, and when she called out Ray's name, she defied the knight's threat with unshakable, fearless defiance. The knight burst into twisted laughter, savoring every ounce of fear, while his madness echoed off the shattered stone around him. Even with pain screaming through her, Lena flashed a faint smile, because Ray, her master, was the whole reason she refused to stop fighting. She straightened up again, snapped her gaze toward his voice, hard, and said he wasn't worthy to stand against Rick. Blade in hand, she stood her ground and snapped back. No one was going to get away with a single insult aimed at Risema. Eyes narrowed like daggers, the knight lifted his sword. No speeches, no warning, just one brutal command: die. Suiglin's devastating charge hit like a thunderclap, and Lena had nothing to stop it. No shield, no magic, no defense at all. Everything would have ended right there until, in that one razor-thin moment, something inside her finally snapped awake and locked into place. With slow, steady breaths, Liana sharpened her mind to a razor edge, and her focus plunged deeper than she'd ever imagined. In that deadly quiet, her senses shot outward, and every tiny movement slowed down, leaving her raw, exposed, and easy to strike. She snapped into action, twisted his sword aside, shifted the impact, and drove her blade straight into his opening. Ray's surging aura tore through her blade and drove it deep into the armor like it was nothing. Sauglint stumbled and let out agonized screams. The wound pulsed like it was alive, ripping control from his limb with every hit of pain. Still trying to catch his breath, he suddenly felt a savage burst of power rip through the air nearby, loud, violent, and way more than he could have expected. Gase crumpled behind him out of nowhere, and that one strike stopped his movement cold. Leona crumpled into the rubble, and across the field, Ray finally barreled in, eyes bulging, breath stuck in his throat. Ray stumbled up to Liana far too late, and fury at his own delay burned as his healing magic exploded through shaking hands. Tears burned in her tired eyes as she whispered, "Tell me, am I useful?" A soft smile lit up his face as he answered her, and then he praised her courage, so proud of everything she'd done. Laughter burst from her lips as she stood her ground against an S-rank warrior, proving just how terrifyingly strong she really was. As exhaustion crashed over her, the contract mark faded away, her strength drained, but her heart still burning with satisfaction. So Glent yells for healing, hurling death threats, but Ray stays icy and flatly refuses, declaring him no comrade anymore. Desperation snapped into Raid's rage. Glent screamed at the top of his lungs, vowing he'd smash Raid's body to pieces if anyone ignored him again. Ray didn't hesitate, he surged forward and drove his foot down, pressing that embedded sword even deeper. Pain detonated in Sugilant's chest as Ra's brutal force slammed the blade in deeper, cutting through hope so hard it stunned everyone. Suglin's gas shook in the air, Ray snatched his R, and the knight's eyes widened as a terrifying secret was revealed under that comb. Ray threw out a healing offer, one condition only, and when that demand hit, Glance hesitated, baffled, because she couldn't understand why Ray could still do it all, even after casting. Arrogance surged back, he barked curses and screamed for healing, even while refusing to sign a single agreement. Ray refused to back off, he shoved back with pure force, and his grip smashed the ground under Sugilant. Bones snapped under the strain. Suglinst clenched his teeth, staring at Ray's terrifying strength way beyond anything he'd ever expected. Fear surged in Ray's chest as rage slipped away, and when she glanced back, that response was terrifying. "I won't stop." Dragging Sue flicked a sharp look ahead, and Ray's voice turned icy as he demanded, Had he ever actually listened and stopped when someone told him to? He snatched up the shattered helmet, once the proud face of war, then sat there like he was thrilled, watching others suffer. Mercy-fueled cries hit the air as Sujulant shook and begged on his knees. Ray heard every word, but his heart stayed stone cold. As Ray Lee's grip tightened, his words seared through the air. This was the last warning. With no second chances left, Glenst finally saw it clear. One last appearance and his fate would be sealed forever. So stared, shoulders slumped in defeat, whispering an apology, no fight left in him, while Ray quietly turned his back and walked away. After a long pause, he finally cast a healing spell and made good on his promise the moment the vow was spoken. Right now, he's beside that battered knight, still chanting healing magic even after the party left him behind. He whispered to himself, swearing that through betrayal and pain, a forge inside him would awaken and finally turn to strength. Under a cold moon, the city stayed eerily quiet as time slipped forward, and the whole world stayed oblivious to what was about to change. Lena stirred under the covers, blinked awake, and froze when she saw a stranger standing right beside her bed. Then he greeted her calmly, smiling as he told her that the night hadn't even finished yet. Lena jolted awake, panic flooding her. She couldn't shake the fear that she'd wasted Ray's time by being out cold in bed. He soothed her, telling her they'd already tracked down an inn where she could heal in safety and get her strength back. Even though her body was finally healed, every ounce of aura she drained left her utterly drained, weak, still, and unable to move. Worry fluttered in her eyes as the memory hit, someone who swung a sword like it was a crown. Ray dropped the bomb. Sauglins had already fled, the warrior ditched them, and Liana was left staring, stunned by the brutal truth. With a calm, crushing confidence, Ray tells Sauglins that everything is over. He fled, clutching his wounded butler after healing him. Her eyes softened as the truth finally landed, and with a slow exhale she murmured, quietly agreeing, then drifted off into rest. Ray didn't dare let guilt crush her from the inside. He couldn't risk the weight of it falling on her shoulders. The moment he offered to help, panic flustered her, like he'd read the wrong page and delivered the last thing she expected. Questions churned in his head and something felt off, so she held back the real reason. Ray swallowed her pride as apologies spilled out in a whisper, and she froze, feeling deep down she deserved the full truth about Suglin's role. Memory hit him like a punch. Regret surged fast, because he saw Liana hide her worry and blame himself for making her show empathy. Even with his hesitation clawing at him, he finally admitted she had every right to know, because Sauglins had once fought beside him, back when they were comrades. With their paths still tangled, sharing the truth turned inevitable, so he spilled the name of their old party. Her shock detonated, confusion flooding in. How could someone clawed out of Yggdrasil's depths be called incompetent? Lena stared him down and asked straight, how could someone that capable still be crushed by his own self-worth? Even after she got stronger, Ray still tore herself up, blaming herself for every injury and for breaking every promise. Without warning, she yanked him into a tight hug, and her warmth shut down every doubt in his head until he couldn't even speak. Her words drifted out gently, and they reminded him, strength like his wasn't only power, it was kindness forged into every breath. Even after everything fell apart, those misread feelings wouldn't vanish. Ray's journey carried deep bonds, not just pain. Back then, he busted his back on chores, threw himself into studying magic, and pushed hard to be useful, right up until battle time. Most nights he cranked his eyes open under dim light, studying like his life depended on it, anything to keep from getting left behind. Tears burned at the edge of his eyes because when he heard her genuine admiration, it finally hit him. He wasn't alone anymore. A soft smile lit up his face, and pure gratitude spilled over as he thanked Liana for staying right beside him. Blushing hard, she panicked, because even in that hug, she couldn't shake the fear that she'd crossed a line with her master. Blushing hard, Liana mumbled back. Then the calm silence shattered as Ray brought up something else. He told her to stop calling him Sama, and suddenly that title didn't feel like it mattered anymore. Her face snapped into shock. She totally misread him, and panic hit hard as she thought he was about to walk out on her. Ray leaned in and spoke from the heart, saying what he truly wanted wasn't distance at all. He wanted her right beside him. A small smile cracked across his face, no bossy orders, just a sincere request, like two equals speaking eye to eye. When Dawn opened up his request, Liana didn't hesitate. She nodded with grit, then blasted off a sudden shot to bury her nerves. Her gaze didn't waver for a second as she vowed, with pure steel in her voice, that she'd stay by his side no matter what storm waited ahead. His smile snapped back into place, and gratitude surged through his voice as he thanked her again for her unwavering loyalty. After that tense pause, he leaned in like the truth was about to explode, because one vital piece was still locked away and he hadn't said it yet. A name lit up on the surface like fate kicking in because his quest had one target, a missing slave, Nana Moa. Lyanna snapped to it. His journey wasn't random at all. It was a desperate quest to find Nana Moa, who'd been torn away and left behind. Even with doubts crawling in, Ray's resolve burned like a forge. He was ready to give everything, anything, to finally find her. When memories of Nana Moa crash back, he can't look away, especially if she's out there, taking on hardship alone. It wasn't some duty. Helping Nana Moa came straight from the care in his heart, because he wanted to be her strength. Still, his eyes softened. He leaned in and reassured Lyanna that she mattered just as much. Lena clutched the blank and Ray's words slammed into her, heart racing, completely lost on what he was trying to say. Memories of running into Lyanna and Nana Moa warmed his chest, until the shock hit and he realized he'd completely forgotten Norn. Ray let out a chuckle and vowed to introduce the mystery, and Lyanna's smile lit up like fireworks as she couldn't wait to meet their mutual friend. Somewhere far off, Norn suddenly sneezed. She only had a soul, but that odd little moment still made her wonder if someone out there just mentioned her. With a cold, blank stare, Norn waved off the thought like it was nothing, because she honestly had zero idea what just happened. Ray burst into the loud Suzaku district, eyes locked on the massive slave registration building, and before he could even blink, an eager informant shoved forward with the most important intel yet, about a girl named Nana Moa just registered moments ago. The slave advisor laid out his methods like a surgeon, pinpointing bloodline traits and then tailoring each pick to what buyers were demanding. Ray listened with bated breath, stunned that Nana Moa's name stayed the same, while she'd already been sold. With panic building, he snatched the advisor's intel and swore to track her down through the recent. Ray tiptoed toward the question, begging for any hint about the buyer, even though she already knew they'd keep it locked behind confidentiality. To pull off the twist, the advisor flashed a grin and agreed on one strict demand: total secrecy. As the advisor spilled the details in a hush, he demanded trust, but Ray snapped back, zeroing in on how loose he'd been with that sensitive information. After a quick beat, Ray nodded and promised to keep it down, then leaned in and waited for the all-important name. Nana Moa's new owner was revealed, none other than the mighty power noble, Duke Argon. Inside a strange lab, a cloaked figure flicked aside a vial. Its magical power was way too weak to work. A visitor knocked at the door and it jolted the figure. Today was the day new slaves were finally delivered. The armored reptilian servant, Vegan, strode in like nothing could rattle him and immediately delivered the good news. No hesitation, just results. With the help of his familiar, the white mage finally pushed through and made it straight to the heart of the capital. Giddy with the news, the robed man proclaimed that Ray's soul was irresistibly alluring. Inside the lab, a shimmering black substance churned and spun wildly, unstable, but absolutely mesmerizing in how deep and layered it looked. The hooded figure praised the outcome, calling it a masterpiece. No, a tragedy like the girl's heartbreaking downfall. On a holy night, a grotesque silhouette crawled out of the mist, and after successful experiments, it transformed into something even worse. The transformed knight clung to its memories and form, then became the blueprint for their next fiend, proof that the next creation would be even worse. At last, the mastermind showed up: Alpha, one of the 4 heavenly demons, and the one carrying an SSS rating. Vegan declared the makeover a total win, while Ulfric basked in the day's luck with a twisted, satisfied grin. Feeling certain the experiment crushed it, Ulfric demanded that Duke Argon be told about the unbelievable results. Days had piled up since Ray split from Nine Moa, but his determination never even wavered. He finally grabbed the power to keep his promise, then every plea she made for help came roaring back to him. Even with chains still biting her ankles, hope flared back to life the moment she heard Ray's calm, quiet offer. Right when Ray hesitated, someone shoved into the moment and demanded to know if she was planning to snatch her from captivity again. A mysterious boy stepped out in front of Ray, his glowing presence tearing at everything the moment she thought she had figured out the world. Ray stood his ground before a familiar echo of his younger self, and every doubt it spat out still clawed at him. He couldn't fully drown it out. The illusion tightened its grip and it hit Ray like a gut punch. He'd never killed, never stepped over that one irreversible line. Ray remembered it all. He never spared a demon or a human by accident, because none of them struck first, and none of them had earned death at his hands. As the truth sharpened in his mind, he swore there was no excuse to steal lives without a real reason. Yet the illusion rattled him with terror, and when death loomed inches away, fear, never mercy, held him back. Nana Moa crumpled right before Ray's eyes, eyes as his illusion spat in the face of the kindness he'd sworn to hold onto. Even with Ray's desperate cry ripping through the air, the illusion shoved the blade deeper, right into Hope's fragile promise. Darkness ripped through his chest and his mind couldn't shake it, too late and not anymore. Nanamo's body slipped out of sight into the shadows, and Ray stood there drenched in blood, too late to stop fate from sealing their end. He shot up screaming her name, rocked by the dream's brutal truth that wouldn't let him ignore it. As Nenemoa drifted into peaceful sleep, she had no clue that the nightmare beside her was tearing into the person watching over her. Sweat poured off Ray as he stared at the illusion, trying to feel its true weight. Was it a dream or a warning blasting straight at him? Shattered voices kept haunting his thoughts, buzzing with dread, and telling him the worst had already started. Anxiety crushed his chest as an unseen threat crept nearer, and his instincts roared louder than any reason. Elsewhere, morning slid in like it always did, calm faces strolling along, clueless to the storm already brewing to hit. Liana hooked up with Ray in town, right as they geared up to pay Duke Arganza's state a visit. A sudden flash ripped through Ray's senses, and the sight of her falling figure snapped back sharp, vivid, and cold as ice. He flashed a smile and acted like it didn't matter, but her name kept haunting the silence. Even with doubts gnawing at his heart, he clenched onto one promise, because he knew the reunion was coming. He pushed forward, head held high, and the truth in his response burned bright in his chest with every step. Duke Arganza's realm stretched out before them, silent, enormous, and weirdly tense, like the air itself was holding its breath. Guards held their posts as the guests trickled in, and whispers snapped through the crowd about how the mansion loomed, huge, unfamiliar, and somehow intimidating. Argon's hidden facility quietly turned into a magical war room, pulling in researchers to stop the Demon Lord's army at the source. Rumors flew that Argon's power was fueled by demons themselves, and those creepy past events only made the suspicion grow teeth. The missing spy Neil slipped away inside, and his dead silence turned everyone's worst fears into something real. The Blue Dragon Division members clenched their worries tight, silently praying Neil would make it back safely. Even with everything hanging in the balance, her belief in Neil never wavered. His power hit the level of elite knights, and the captain trusted him with his whole heart. If Argon's links to demons turned out to be real, they'd launch immediate contingency action on the spot. Overconfidence flared in the knights, but their leader slammed the brakes and warned them not to underestimate the danger that could strike at any moment. A monstrous figure lunged out of the shadows, and the moment it showed up, everyone's composure crumbled and every careless sound died in its presence. A brutal shock rippled through everyone as a killing intent slammed into the room, so intense it felt like it cut the air open, even without a single touch. In the blink of an eye, that dark presence vanished, and the hallway still felt loaded with tension. A hooded man strode forward like he had all the time in the world. Then the mask slipped, and you realized he'd been hiding his bloodlust until this exact moment. Then, without warning, he revealed a horrifying sight. Zell's lifeless body dangled there, grass limp beneath him. Everyone went dead quiet as Zell crumpled in a violent collapse, his body thudding to the ground and shutting every voice down in pure horror. A calm, sinister figure finally spoke. Alfred then coldly ended Zell in an instant, with zero mercy. Ray snapped into action, surged forward with his sacred sword technique, and went straight for Alfred. No hesitation, no mercy. Their blades slammed together in midair, each strike ripping through the air with explosive magic and raw, crushing momentum. Power detonated between them, blasting both fighters straight through walls as rubble exploded everywhere. The squad suddenly realized Ulfric wasn't special at all. Turns out he was just one of the 4 heavenly death demons. Even though he knew Ulfric was a heavenly death demon, he still raised his furious magic-infused sword and unleashed a savage strike. A devastating shockwave ripped across the battlefield, hurling debris everywhere as the explosive power surged straight into Alpha. Ulfric burst out of the smoke unscathed, surprisingly calm, then praised magic that flooded us with power but did nothing. Lime and the others were ready to help, but he charged forward by himself, stopping them cold without even hesitating. He refused to gamble with his life, stared Ulfric down, and summoned a dark, radiant magic that, to his raised, clashed with Alpha. Magic exploded, but then he felt his own energy get sucked straight into Alpha's sword. Alpha just watched the reactions with calm in his eyes, because that sword didn't just soak magic for power, it drank in far more than anyone expected. An explosion slammed the area and the scan unit frantically tore through the smoke, desperate to find where Alpha had vanished. From behind him, Ulfric leaned in and hissed sacred secrets, the sword Therese's father once passed down. Reeling from confusion and pain, he pressed for answers. How did Ulfric know something this deeply personal? Only the king learned where the sword came from when they held the weapon certification ceremony. A sneaky leak hit the royal court, spilling secret info where it never should have gone, because even your most trusted allies can turn into betrayal in the blink of an eye. Ulfric laughs off their suspicions and drops the truth. Those royal aides are being twisted by the demon's corruption. He nonchalantly drops the bombshell. The demon lord is dead, and seals it by confirming his daughter now reigns in his place. The new demon lord, disgusted Alfur, tries to sound peaceful, then sneers that everyone else is weak and spineless. Ulfric screamed about years of persecution, blaming the new demon lord for forgetting every last drop of their suffering. A brutal hit crashed in. Lime didn't see it coming. He got hurt while throwing himself in front of everyone to shield them from the debris. With a roar that shook the skies, Ulfric declared war and promised to smash the human realm apart by flooding it with a demon army so overwhelming it would swallow everything. Therese gaped in pure shock as the memories crashed back. Neil stood beside those demons, smiling with lethal, cruel intent. Just days ago, Neil proudly grabbed the mission and promised to slip into Argon's mansion, alone. A smug grin snapped onto Ulfric's face the moment he unveiled Neil, alive but unmistakably twisted under demon control. Rage detonated and betrayal drove harsh, twisted emotions into weapons, blades sharp enough to cut through anything. The ceiling ripped open, monsters poured down, reinforcements surged in, and from the very start, Ulfric was planning a full-scale assault. Cornered from every side, he clenched his fist. This wasn't the end. The real fight was about to explode. Two adventurers rolled up to the noble district, staring in shock at the towering walls and its mind-blowing grandeur. Rain squinted at the mansion, feeling powerful magic clinging to its walls like a living web. At the gate, heavily armed barrier masters stood motionless, guarding the noble grounds with relentless magical vigilance. They re-explained the technique and shattered every barrier, even locking onto divine treekeeper sacred seals that spirit users couldn't breach. Only the Vajroder family could keep those defenses standing, and they milked it for all it was worth, charging a brutal price for their unbeatable grip on magic. Rhea let Loki's noble blood echo in her mind, then shoved it aside because she could feel his eyes locked on only one thing, Nenema. Right before he could get anywhere near a man named Kronos, Kronos swept in, draped in noble clothes and flashing a sly, confident smile. At first they were wary, then Ray remembered the advisor who'd helped track Nana Ma's location the very day before. With a straight-up intro, Kronos finally revealed his name, what he was in this mess, and the weird link he had to the mansion. He was born into the Kronos bloodline, one of the Sword Saints, picked for ruthless skill and forged by fate to join the hero's party. Ray squared off against Kronos, fists clenched, demanding the truth. Was this whole meeting really just a cover for Hemo and her heartbreaking past? Kronos nailed the real motive to the wall, and the truth hit hard. His sister's condition was worse than Ray could have ever imagined. Her eyes went blank, her body went limp, and her kimono crumpled in stillness. She couldn't live like this without a powerful healing intervention. To repay the help, Kronos leaned on his noble connections and promised Duke Argon would grant him an audience. Once Ray got what was going on, it hit him. Kronos wasn't just asking for help, he was playing it smart, stacking obligations against a healer so dangerous nobody else could touch. Humano's savage strength slammed back into Ray's mind, and he tightened his grip as emotions churned under his calm. After weighing the offer, he realized Kronos' noble blood was the only doorway left to reach Duke Argon. So if Himono's magic circuits got busted, caution went out fast, because even his healing couldn't bring his sight back. Her chance at fighting was gone, but restoring her sight without any power was still within reach thanks to cutting-edge healing. Kronos just wanted her peace. She'd rather have a quiet, normal life than chase strength. Saying Himono's name snapped old wound open in Rui's chest, and she couldn't stop remembering the day she left him behind. Kronos spilled the whole truth. Himono finally confessed Ray's exile from the hero's party and admitted what she'd done afterward. Despite her reputation, she kept it all locked inside, choking on regret and refusing to carry that betrayal by herself. He agreed to help again on one condition. It had to put him one step closer to finding Ninema. When Ray sensed locked eyes with Kronos, his fierce devotion to Himano hit harder than any words ever could. Kimono's party comes up again and he re-asks to make the Black Mage fail, because that moment is burned into his memory. Kronos finally laid bare her fate. She failed, but she still died shielding Kimono and the others, ripping herself into the path of that brutal assault. Elsewhere, a demon nonchalantly toyed with the story of Neil, an S-rank warrior who got cut down in the middle of battle, crushed by impossible odds. Vegan barreled in to join the elite, traded quick words with them, and then stepped right into another wave of destruction to raise its squad. Despite the brutal pushback, powerful demons kept dropping, because someone or something was wiping them out with terrifying speed and ruthless precision. In the Holy Knights, the Teres hit peak teamwork, tore through their enemies so hard they crushed the limits, even beating the usual Sss-Rank party standards. Sudden news hit Alfred, and right away, chaos exploded through the mansion, trapped behind protective barriers until this very moment. Duke Argon fumed and barked for orders, hinting that guests were coming soon, while the threat of that lingering intruder still haunted the estate. Curses of betrayal erupted the moment someone uncovered Argon's hidden deal with demons. No excuses, just everyone's worst fear confirmed. Calm as a blade, Argon accepted the truth, and then sneered at the whole idea that they even needed confirmation, like they didn't already know everything. Argon laughed off the resistance, barking for surrender, while a cold, dark grin slowly crawled across Alpha's face. Nobody saw it coming. He stayed calm as he declared the fight was over, and warned that someone even stronger was on the way. With a brutal surge of power, Ulfric triggered the weight of the heart and crushed Captain Therese on the spot, like an unseen giant pinned him to the world. Every limb buckled, his breath turned ragged, and escape started to feel impossible under that magic, gravity-smothering pressure. Laughing at their helplessness, Ulfric unleashed a terrifying power. He weaponized their own emotional weight to freeze them in place, paralyzed by what they couldn't escape. Ulfric unleashed a new kind of power. When the mechanics hit, the emotional weight crushed everything, spiking gravity and locking enemies in place with his own pain. No hesitation, he cranked the pressure to level 2, and the moment it hit, a raw, ecstatic scream of pain tore out of him. While Therese was grinding through it, Ulfric sneered at his stamina and laughed that this technique could crank all the way up to level 5. Duke Argon cut in fast, barking that the whole point was corruption, not death, and that their Sade was the key, prized for demon transformation. Even with her heart crushed, Therese gripped onto the duty she swore to fulfill. She had to make sure her comrades got out, no matter what it cost her. As Alfric's ruthless gravity bore down, its bones buckled and shattered under the crushing weight. Then its legs gave out completely, and it was flattened to nothing. Laughing in his face, Ulfric dangled restoration, but only if he accepted a demon limb, guaranteeing his body would be fully corrupted and transformed. Even with pain tearing through him, Therese still leaned close to the fallen, whispering apologies as he swallowed helplessness while his subordinates screamed for help. Suddenly, a blinding bolt slammed into Alfred's face, snuffing out his laughter and shattering his focus in an instant. Therese's drinks disappeared in a blink. Everyone froze in pure shock. Then Ray finally burst in, radiating power like it was totally unexpected. Alfred's shattered body crawled back together, and with every snap and stitch, a sinister grin spread as demonic power surged, intent burning in his eyes. Earlier that day, Liana spotted a stray cat and crouched down with pure joy, meowing back like it was the best surprise ever. Ray let out a chuckle as he teased her, grinning at how wildly excited she got over the tiny vocal feline. Curious what she wanted, Ray pressed the question, and Liana lit up, blurting out her love for her. Over her shoulder, she whispered that she'd fallen for the smile Ray had shown earlier. A sinister grin spread as rubble shattered aside, and that defeated body clung to consciousness by a thread. On the way to Argon Mansion, Liana spotted a stray cat and eased closer like she didn't want to scare it. Leona's teasing words left her flustered, and Ray burst into a chuckle, then quickly apologized, though he didn't exactly give away what was amusing him. As she stroked the cat, Liana blurted out her love for animals and admitted she had developed a surprisingly tender bond with it. Ray flashed a real smile back at her and confessed that nothing in the world mattered more to him than Liana's smile. A sudden pact ripped open the ground, and Ryan with his allies stumbled upon a wounded commander. Cautiously creeping forward, Rays felt a sickening burst of magical pressure, stronger than an SS ring, and the air itself reeked with blood. With a mocking grin, the enemy finally stepped into view, Filk, one of the Demon Four. Ray clenched his fists because this demon didn't just stumble in, it had been waiting on purpose, craving their meeting from the start. Everything was a filthy plan of ours. He trapped those demon athletes by baiting them with undead terror. Ray uncovered the bombshell truth. Duke Arjun had secretly teamed up with the demon race's forces. A sudden flash hit showing a boy shouting for Ray, and the whole tense moment shattered. Confusion fogged over Ray's eyes as he stared at the boy. His face felt painfully familiar, but he couldn't pin where he'd seen it. While everyone else doubts Ray and wonders why he's so quiet, our field crew can't stop digging, because that mysterious woman's identity and her link to everything are screaming for answers. From above, a blazing crimson-haired winged figure dropped out of the sky and stole every breath in the room, until Ray finally locked eyes with her and gasped, whispering, "That's her, Nana Moa, reborn." A ghostly boy beamed beside him, completely stunned by her beauty, while Ray froze in stunned silence. Our Filk snapped that her soul was gone, but her body still crushed past human limits, powered by a savage transformation. While the filth jeered at divinity, Ray spun away and flat out refused their claim that she had no soul. Nenemoa's lifeless body drifted in the air, and the spirit boy wasted no time. He swore she was already dead. Tears slammed into rage as Ray blurted denial, and the soldiers barreled in while his allies stood frozen in stunned silence. They grinned at Ray's grief like it was a joke, playing sweet, fake concern while stabbing him with nothing but empty sympathy. Suddenly, a brutal wave of magic slammed down and crushed everything. Our Phi-Ik-S spell pinned the allies in place, smashing them under relentless, destructive force. Lyanna fought the crushing force with fading strength, barely holding on, then Ray and another fighter smashed straight through the ruined floor. Taunting laughter bounced off the walls, then our dirty truth hit like a punch. Menomo's body couldn't survive the transformation, and during demonification, she was done. Nana Moa's smile, soft, kind, and completely unaware of what fate had queued up for her, came rushing back to her in a wave of memory. Our filth admitted she died on the spot, then Ray's whole body shook, crushed by grief and furious rage as it poured through his heart. With rage blazing in his chest, he stood like a fortress and dared us. Then Ray snapped his creation magic into the world and challenged our people head-on. Energy crackled as Ray lunged forward, stabbing his blade with deadly intent and razor-sharp precision. Steel slammed in, our folks' eyes bulged with shock. Ray's strike had landed, and it was fatal. Arfil snapped in with lightning speed, slammed the strike aside, and grinned at Ray's reckless, straight-to-the-waist charge. Then Ray got blasted backward hard, and Arfil coldly pointed out just how violently that magic energy exploded. Power erupted between them, dark magic and blistering rays crashed midair, and the unstable force started spiraling out of control. Determination slammed into place. Ray surged forward again, fists tight as steel, whispering a vow that he'd kill, no hesitation for a second. Ray's glare detonated with unshakable rage as he roared at the top of his lungs and swore death with every ounce of power he had. Rage swallowed him whole, and he surged ahead again and again, each step exploding, each strike screaming, "Kill." Nana Moa's image popped back up again, and that gentle smile ripped open the reminder of everything that had been taken from him. Pain drove him to his breaking point. He screamed her name and swore vengeance, his voice shaking with raw, furious violence. Our Filk lands another brutal strike. Ray slams to the ground, but he's still breathing, still refusing to give up. Bloodied and battered, he finally drove home one crushing punch, his fist ripping deep into our Phil. Old memories crashed back. Two kids sat shoulder to shoulder, blissfully unaware that one day tragedy would shatter their whole peaceful world. As blood poured out, our people choked on shattered words. His strength crumbled the moment he asked for death. Ray spotted their smiles again, but then he cast his spell, silently grieving the one he'd just lost. Burn marks shredded his body, but he didn't flinch, eyes locked forward, breath pounding, resolve forged harder than ever. To end Arfel for good, he craved more power, because Yggdrasil still had untapped strength and it was off limits. Ray lunged ahead, aura detonating with brutal force, while Arfel kept shouting for more, desperate to claw for power no mortal should ever touch. Determination blazed in his eyes. Ray demanded more power, even if it burned him to the bone. Their clash exploded, steel slammed into steel, and our folk got hit with Ray's sudden counter-strike, totally unprepared. Fear snapped through our voices. He knew Ray's human body couldn't hold out against Yggdrasil's power for much longer. RFLC threw down a challenge, a twisted little game, hiding its mockery behind a calm, calculating grin. Our Filk throws down the last challenge. Claim your life right now or watch it slip away, because this is the only shot you'll ever get to act. With a chilling calm, he bared his chest and dared Ray to end him, either through his heart or his throat. Ray froze on the spot, doubt crashing over him, as our filth-twisted wordsmith treated life and death like it was just another show. No matter what it took, resolve, hardening, traps or not, Ray swallowed it all and accepted the deal because this time, he'd slaughter without a single hesitation. Ray lunged in with a blazing thrust, driving the blade straight into our folk's chest, right on the spot, exactly like he'd silently decided. The folk taunted him with cold confidence, firing questions at Ray's hesitation after he'd promised to kill without mercy. A familiar voice thundered inside Ray's head, begging him to end Nesimer's enemy right now. Our guys didn't resist for a second. Filks grinned, then shoved a finger forward and unleashed a weird power. Overwhelming memories slammed into Ray's mind like a bomb, roaring and ripping through him until he couldn't breathe, Nesimer's monstrous fate flashing on repeat, while Arfolk's brutal power exposed the nightmare of how she'd forced her into a grotesque secret. Memories of Nesumer crashed into him, warping his body and mind into a terrifying, inhuman demon. His eyes went dull as his consciousness slipped away, and his breath stopped midair while the transformation finished, sealing his fate. Golden-haired Leona snaps into shocked disbelief, because Ray lies perfectly still inside the enemy's binding circle. A colossal armored brute bursts out, smashing stone as it arrives. Then the allies freeze, horrified, because they recognize the terrifying force radiating from Ray's brand new power. Gagged and pinned down, Ray glares in silence as rage simmers in his chest. His enemies sneer at how helpless he looks on that stage. With all resistance shattered, Ray stands before what's already gone, dark power surging and pulsing through the transformation that's been forced on him. Bygone leans in, grinning like he owns the moment, while Ray's host body starts to stir with an unstable power no one should wake. Ray's wounds snapped shut in the blink of an eye, and Bygone just stood there, gaping as this impossible regeneration played out right in front of him. Ray didn't use healing magic at all. He accidentally unlocked forbidden creation sorcery, and it rebuilt his body from the inside out. That smug grin cracked into something whiter as the trapped ally gaped in disbelief, finally realizing what that magic Ray had just unleashed. Laughing at their reactions, Bygone goaded the group until he forced Tragide to hear the revelation coming next. Leonis's heart thundered when Bygone finally spilled the truth behind creation magic, forcing everyone to turn and watch as Ray's long-hidden secret came to light. Unlike normal healing magic, Ray's ability doesn't just heal, it scorches aura so hard that it crushes the limits of what any human can survive. That insane power all traces back to Ray's right eye, where Yggdrasil's aura gets funneled straight into his body. Bygone smashes the lie fast. This aura isn't magic or divine at all, it's something stranger, and even Holy Knight has never seen it. This mysterious energy races through the world like it's unstoppable, so powerful it crushes every force we've ever known, making magic and divine power look like weak little shadows. Ray doesn't just carry power, he rips pure life force straight from the world tree's endless well, and Leona watches that glowing mountain in silence, whispering mana like she's just recognized the threat, and it terrifies her. Gasps exploded as the truth hit. Everyone finally realized Ray's power wasn't just beyond explanation, it was something else entirely. Questions spun in their heads. If this was mana, then Ray might be hiding a legendary origin. Bygone said it with pure pride. Only the hero's descendants could master mana like that in a fight. Reeling from the truth, Lyanna realized Ray wasn't just any fighter. He carried the sacred bloodline of ancient champions inside him. Lyanna sized up Ray's aura and swore it matched the mightiest hero ever, straight from Kurtz and Hardin Belgius' sacred bloodline. Creation magic could conjure anything, but Ray didn't realize he was trapping himself, clinging to imagined limits and mental chains. That legendary power stayed sealed inside Ray, sleeping and untouched, waiting to flip the entire battlefield but never getting the chance. Bygone finally admitted it. Ray could have blasted right past even him if he'd only fully awakened the power locked inside. Skeptics erupted over Bygone's claim, demanding proof that Ray really carried the ancient hero's bloodline. Bygone leaned in and said Ray's head had been ripped open. Then lies were planted inside him to wrest control of his mind. Once Ray fully converts, she'll become the beating heart of an army so terrifying it dwarfs even history's greatest warriors. Horrified allies watched as the vanished plan cracked wide open, turning Ray's body into a tool for ruthless magical experiments. With a casual flick of his hand, Bygone ordered his subordinate to grab everyone, leaving Leona frozen, stunned, and gasping. A towering reptilian soldier crashed into their path, grinding to a stop as his eyes pinned the struggling adventurers up ahead. Leona lunged forward, desperation swallowing her fear as she screamed Ray's name at the top of her lungs. In the crushing dark, Ray stood alone, swallowed by silence, as a faint beam of light above crept downward inch by inch. A faint voice echoed through the void, and he snapped his head upward, uncertain if it was real or just a cruel illusion. Bit by bit, memories slammed back. This place, that voice, and the brutal agony Alfric's magic had burned into him. Right in front of him, a younger version of himself materialized, spitting the same brutal words of failure he once swallowed and believed. Crumpled on the ground, he muttered through despair, fully convinced he'd been useless, like Loki had once insisted. Don't beat yourself up for him missing it sooner, because if he had, it might have doomed Nimamoa the second she faced him. The second the thought struck him, her last moments came crashing in. Memory flooded his mind, and those haunting flashes wouldn't let go. Even so, he swore Nimamoa was doomed either way. Somebody else would have taken her place and carried out her execution. Guilt gnawed harder and harder in her chest, and she couldn't stop thinking, maybe if she'd left the village sooner, she could have spared herself from that tragedy. The villagers' suffering kept flashing through his mind, and he just couldn't force himself to leave them behind. Clenching his fist, he regretted every second he'd stayed in Yggdrasil, because leaving sooner could have stopped everything that came after. Just one more step and he could have avenged Nimamoa, but fear snapped the moment in half. He murmured doubts under his breath, convinced he'd always been weak and already doomed to fail. Even with Yggdrasil's power blasting through him, an ugly emptiness still hollowed his chest, because he was just a small, worthless person getting drowned by the past voices. After everything hit him, he finally understood it. His kind heart couldn't carry the crushing weight of the lives he'd ended. Nemomo's words hit hard. Kindness isn't real strength if you use it as a shield to dodge emotional responsibility and do nothing. Choked by fear, he swung back at the world, just to feel wanted, not because he truly believed. Exhaustion smashed into him, and the worst fear hit. He'd always been weak, too shattered to keep dragging this burden forward. Tears burned in his eyes as his younger self begged him to give up, whispering that there was nothing left worth fighting for, nothing left to try. He started believing he couldn't save a single soul, because even saving himself had always felt impossible, like it was just out of reach. He let the world fade and whispered to sleep, begging, just this once, that he'd be the one to save himself. Peace washed over his eyes as his spirit slipped away, melting into a soft, silent darkness. No memories survive, only this quiet finale where the pain finally stopped and even the longing trickled away into nothing. Everything slipped away into nothing, and he couldn't make sense of a single thing, only knew it was time to rest. Light burst around him the moment he froze in place, and he felt a voice whisper back from somewhere it was never supposed to return from. Out of the empty white void, Nimamoa glided in, flashing a warm smile as she whispered his name. Meanwhile, I pushed out of the mist and crept straight toward Ray. Then her eyes snapped wide at the shock of our impossible reunion. Shock slammed into Ray's face as he battled to accept that she was there, a presence he'd assumed was gone forever ago. He stared at reality with a shaking mind, remembering her soul vanish. Then there she was, standing calm, looking just a little lost. Ray snapped that she was only an illusion, and that hit her like a lightning strike, ripping open a fierce rush of emotion. Anger burst in her eyes as she slammed the blow, forcing him to prove she was real, by making him endure the pain of shared memories. Ray finally smiled, fully convinced. Her attitude, her posture, the way she carried herself, all of it screamed that she was the real Nimamoa. With teasing warmth, she showered him with praise, and her steady voice melted his nerves, forcing every last doubt to loosen its grip. He fired back a compliment about her beauty, but guilt crashed in fast. He'd never made it in time to save her. Tears burst down his face as he choked out an apology, his voice shaking with pure regret, haunted by the memories of her sacrifice. Nimamoa pressed her forehead to his, whispered thanks like it meant everything, and meeting Ray again filled her heart to the brim. Tears burned at the edge of Ray's eyes as Nimamoa spun around, flashing that bright, calming smile. Suddenly, her body shimmered with a faint glow. Ray clocked the shift and panic hit, like her time was already slipping away. Ray was desperate to stay by her side. He begged that he'd catch up right away, refusing to leave her alone again. Nimamoa gently halted him, and with a steady, unshakable voice, she told him he wasn't ready to cross that line yet. She leaned in with a soft, teasing voice and asked if he'd forgotten something. Then her eyes tipped him off that this was the final goodbye. With a soft smile, Nimamoa leaned in and reminded him, His journey wasn't done yet, something precious was still waiting to be finished. Her words hit Ray like a punch and he froze, because she trusted him, sure, but doubt slipped into his head and insisted it just couldn't happen. Dark thought crawled back and the shadows of his past self laughed in his face, leaving him convinced he had absolutely nothing left. Her fingers clamped around his strength, and a steady current rushed through her touch, calm, certain, and undeniable. Even with that gentle voice, Ray's heart dropped like a rock. He couldn't believe he'd somehow become truly strong. Liana's smile flashed in his mind, warmth clinging there, refusing to fade. Ray's eyes blew wide. He just realized someone else was still out there, waiting to meet him alive. Doubt clawed at his chest. Could he really swallow that fate and let Liana die without even fighting back? Liana's laughter and her kindness came crashing into his mind, and suddenly he remembered exactly what he stood to lose. With that kind of resolve burning in him, Ray handed Liana's future to Minamoa, whose gentle gaze seemed to know exactly what Liana would need. He clenched her hand hard and declared it like a promise. This time, he'd fight for everything. Pride shook in her voice as she leaned in and urged him to step forward. Stand tall, no fear. A tender kiss landed on his forehead, sealing her goodbye with warmth and quiet trust. Then she smiled one last time and her figure dissolved into light as she drifted away, leaving nothing but the air. All alone, Ray clenched his fist, stepped forward and barked a fierce laugh, swearing he'd push her will forward no matter what. Then a twisted echo of himself showed up, sneering at his weakness and demanding how he'd ever keep Leona safe. Flashbacks of old pain crash in and shove hope out of reach, drowning him in doubt and forcing guilt deeper into his heart. He clung to his breath, knowing the words had slammed the door. Turning back was dead. Logic shrieked that it was over. No mana, no will, nothing could rescue him unless something inside him detonated into a total change. Conflicting thoughts churned in his head, his face set in stone as he finally chose. Hesitation died the moment he made that decision, and there was no turning back. Conflicting thoughts spun inside him as his face hardened. He teetered between hesitation and a choice that couldn't be undone. If saving everyone meant tossing his humanity aside, then fine, let it happen, because his transformation had already kicked off. Cold logic hit like a blade. Better to strike fear into them than stand powerless again. Better to drown in darkness than watch everything slip away once more. With eyes blown wide, he felt something slip inside and start tearing into his soul as the takeover began. A whisper snapped the seal shut, and he handed over his soul, every limit, every last piece of humanity. He offered his soul to Yggdrasilio, embracing the darkness like a last, desperate shield. Liana stared in pure horror as the ground buckled beneath her feet. Something ancient and brutally violent had just ripped itself awake. At the quake's epicenter, the enemies spun around, and terror crawled in the moment Ray's presence tore through the air. Now remade, Ray surged forward, and as debris and crushing pressure trailed after him, it felt like the whole world was witnessing a soul reborn. His voice sank to a low growl, and with one word, he slammed home the truth. This reckoning was only just getting started. A lightning-fast slash drove straight into the lizard warrior's chest, and the instant it hit, his body jerked and convulsed as corrupted energy burst out in a violent flood. Ray clamped his claws tight, sank them into flesh that tore apart, then drove his fist through with brutal precision, so fast it left even the target stunned. Panic detonated across the group when the enemy's strongest fighter suddenly faltered. His arm buckled and it sent shockwaves through everyone. Cold words hit the air. Ray's warning was crystal clear. The next encounter would be over with merciless death. Death slammed in, rage exploded, and the wounded enemy barreled forward recklessly, humiliation and pain fueling his unstable fury. Ray's magic-laced punch detonated on impact, smashing straight through the enemy's skull with brutal, unstoppable force. Power slammed outward, cracking flesh and armor as the lizard warrior got hurled backward, right across the middle of the screen. Ray didn't hesitate for a second. He twisted hard and hurled the enemy flying, then hammered the follow-through like it was the final punch. The monstrous warrior whirled through the air, arms and legs going wild, his jaw torn to pieces as dark blood splashed across the ground behind him. A deafening crash ripped through the ground, debris exploded into the sky, and the enemy's landing got pulverized on impact. Dust drifted down, and out of the haze, a cloaked figure closed in on the rubble, where Baijin's body had disappeared. His dead body lay in ruin, stone flesh cracked open, shattered to the point the head was erased beyond any chance of repair. Ray burst out of the smoke, his body shaking, while his hand twisted in transformation as Liana charged in, frozen in pure shock. Ray stood his ground and didn't flinch as the elf murmured one calm healing spell, heal. Alpha, Ray said his name with cold, deadly conviction, warning that escape was about to vanish for good. Blood smeared his lips as he grinned, raising fingers that still throbbed with leftover dark power. Liana and the others just froze in place, their jaws dropping at Ray's shocking appearance, lurking in the enemy's grass. Ray surged forward, staring Elfric down, while Elfric just stood there, calm as the shattered hull floor crumbled around them. Ulfric slammed down with crushing force, barking at Ray to unleash full power. No hesitation, no limits. Backed into a corner, Alfred went straight at Ray, demanding proof that the power Ray's Dressel unleashed could become their weapon. He nodded to the test, clenched his grip tighter around the blade, and braced himself to take Ulfric head-on. The ground exploded under their feet as both fighters slammed out brutal, unstoppable force. No pause, no mercy. Ray erupted forward, eyes locked on his goal, and his body blazed with unleashed, Yggdrasil-enhanced magical pressure. Alfred sprang forward to meet Ray's strike head-on, and confidence blazed as raw energy tore out from his limbs. Their fists slammed together with explosive force, debris blasting through the air as Alfred drove Ray hard into the shattered earth. Ray snapped into action with razor focus, parried Alfred's attack, then carved a clean arc straight across Alfred's chest. Explosions kept roaring through the shattered hall as Ray and Alfred slammed into each other, their fury rising with every hit. Alfred swung in with another devastating strike, but Ray snapped it aside fast, refusing to step back even an inch. Surprise exploded across Alfred's face as Ray's movements shot past prediction, smashing through everything and flipping the entire fight with unstoppable force. Rage twisted in midair, snapped into a savage counter, and slammed Ulfric with a ruthless storm of perfectly aimed hits. Even with all that insane aura pumping through him, Alpha still couldn't wrap his head around how Ray's body survived that impossible speed without instantly crumpling. Ray's blade ripped through Alfric's defenses, blew apart his magical constructs, and drove straight for his chest. With his eyes blazing, he stepped up and swung hard, determined to crush any hesitation before it could blunt his strike. A crisp punch slammed into Alfred's face, yanking him backward while Ray's stance exploded with unstoppable momentum. Furniture blasted apart inside the chamber, shockwaves slammed the walls as raw energy erupted from their clash. Alpha slammed into the rubble, stunned and gasping, and he knew he'd lost before his consciousness slipped away. Debris erupted into the sky as Ulfric's body slammed down, sending crumbling walls and collapsing ceilings exploding beneath him. Eyes blazing with raw power, Ray dropped from the sky in a blur, blade aimed to end the fight for good. With a thunderous shockwave ripping outward, Ray's attack smashed the entire structure to pieces while the storm of debris swallowed it all. Liana stared from a distance, frozen in shock, and couldn't catch her breath as the earth signaled rays trembled, then tore loose with their final, crushing strike. So thick with smoke and chaos, the battlefield vanished from sight, leaving nothing but the echoes of destruction haunting the silence. From under the shattered rubble, Elfric pushed himself up, bleeding, furious, and clutching fistfuls of stones just to keep from toppling over. He snarled through clenched teeth, his whole body shaking as fury surged, rage burning hotter after he survived Ray's brutal assault. Up on his perch, Ray watched in stunned silence as Alfred staggered through the ruins, frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. Mocking words dripped from Ray's mouth as he grilled Alfred's strength, daring him to prove what his power testing was actually for. Silence slammed down between them, and their torn clothes and blistered skin screamed that neither one walked away unhurt. A twisted grin snapped across Elfric's face as he praised Ray's strength with terrifying, lingering admiration. Even with defeat crushing him, Ulfric stared at Ray's insane speed and raw power and admitted it totally blew past anything he could handle. Once he stopped seeing Ray as human, disbelief shattered his pride and the scream in his mind wouldn't let up. Eyes bulged as blood splattered and those raging rays blasted ahead with terrifying power. His entire body flared, lit up by raw divine energy. Liana gasped as a blast erupted miles away, and the shockwave of pure destruction hit her like a punch. Liana finally broke free and snapped the restraints loose. Then, right in the middle of the conversation, a brutal shockwave tore through the air and grabbed everyone's attention. Ulfric staggered out, burning and torn to pieces, but his rage wouldn't let him hit the ground. Ray didn't even think. He snapped a healing spell into place and watched his battered body knit itself back together, like he'd done it 100 times. As long as there's even a shred of matter left, Ray's body fights back. No matter how brutal the damage is, he always heals. As the gap kept widening, Ulfric finally admitted, brute force just wouldn't cut it anymore. Alfred slammed his trump card into motion, hurling a spell straight at Ray to finish the whole fight for good. With a smug grin and dead certain confidence, Ulfric mocked Ray's helplessness as his paralyzing layered curse pinned him in place. Ulfric strode in with total confidence, and when Ray hit the ground, his magic finally slipped out of his control. A brutal ambush snapped Ulfric out of his spell. Another fighter crashed into him, taking the bloodshed head-on to shield Ray. Alpha's Ray stayed frozen in the middle of the chaos, brushing everything off as he swore the next moment would seal it all. Blood slid down Alporix's chest as his cocky smirk died, because something had punched straight through his defense.